Season 6, Episode 1. Members only. Woke up this morning. Gotta explain why Season 6 of The Sopranos was split up into 2 parts instead of 1. The main reason for its longer runtime boils down to one word. Money. With The Sopranos pulling numbers like these, it's no surprise that HBO wanted to produce more episodes of the show. But the caveat to this is that television contracts for the actors working on a specific show often increase their pay with each season. If Season 6B of The Sopranos was considered Season 7 of the show instead, the actors likely would have gotten a nice raise to get around paying their actors more money. HBO opted to instead split up Season 6 of The Sopranos into 2 parts, resulting in Seasons 6A and 6B. What a bunch of cheapskates. The final season of The Sopranos kicks off on a high note with Agent Harris puking his guts out while Vito poses for an ad for a weight loss club. Fun fact, the reason why Vito loses so much weight in the show is because Vito's actor, Joseph Gannascoli, actually lost over 140 pounds between seasons 5 and 6 of the show, with a combination of surgery, dieting, and exercise. Nice one, Joe. We're given a montage similar to the one at the beginning of season 2 as we're reacquainted with each of our main cast of characters and what they've been up to ever since Tony B's "You killed my friend that I briefly mentioned like 2 times was my friend this season, prepare to die" incident. Janice breastfeeds her new child while Bobby happily works on his train collection, and Gene has a good time with his wife while Finn has a good time with his soon-to-be wife. Ray Curto walks on his treadmill while watching George Bush tell the press to watch this drive.
Now watch this drive.
AJ gets freaky on his phone in the middle of class while Carm gives Adriana a look at the new spec house she's building. Hey, wait a second. Carm tells Adriana that she's worried all the time as Adriana suddenly fades away, revealing Carm's conversation to be nothing but a dream. And the montage ends as Tony tries digging up $40K that Junior buried years ago, with Junior claiming that he needs it for his retrial. Junior's dementia is certainly not getting any better as he rambles about Pussy Malenga stealing the money, the guy who Junior tried to whack in Artie's restaurant all the way back in the pilot episode. And Bobby brings baby Nika into the kitchen before taking Junior to the doctors. Janice recommends moving Junior to a nursing home.
The
Retirement community, while Tony says that it didn't go well last time they tried to bring a family member to one of those things, saying that they'll keep Junior at home despite Janice saying that they could pay off Junior's legal bills by selling the place. Phil tells Johnny that he's keeping peace with Tony despite Billy's death, and Gene gives Tony some nice watches, revealing that he received a $2 million inheritance from his recently deceased Aunt Edie. He tells Tony that he wants to move to Florida and retire from the game, with Tony saying that he can't exactly retire from the mafia as a made guy. And Gene insists that it would mean a lot to him and his wife Deanne as Tony says that he'll think about it and gives Gene a hug. Gene returns to his family checking out some houses in Florida and gets pissy at his son Kevin and accuses him of doing drugs at his friend's place. Tony and Carm eat south of the border where the California rolls play while Carm tells Tony about her weird Adriana dream the night before, asking where did Adriana go in the first place as Tony's like, haha, this sauce is so good, let's not talk about Adriana. They talk about Ginny facing troubles with Johnny's trial along with an asset seizure from the government as Tony says that he's worried that someone close to him might flip like Jimmy Petriel did to Johnny. And Hesh has this totally natural and not completely dubbed over conversation with his son-in-law Eli.
Thanks for dinner, Hesh.
Grease coming through the bag, as usual.
Chinese food. It's part of the tradition.
Stuff like this makes you wonder what the original conversation was and why they changed it in the first place. Like, was there information that they still needed to deliver, or did they just think the conversation sucked? The two suddenly get stopped by this gaggle of mob associates who force the two out of the car and beat the shit out of them. And Eli quickly and swiftly makes an escape.
I did 20 fucking years.
Vito talks to the guys about his weight loss as they shit talk him anyway for having an ugly jacket. And Vito points out Gene's members only jacket and talks business with Phil while Chris and Tony talk about how annoying Phil is. Though Tony says he's actually been acting rational lately and compliments him for taking up his acting boss role efficiently and not trying to kill everybody like last season. This compliment immediately backfires as Tony learns from Hesh that he and Eli got beat up by a bunch of Lupertazzi family associates, with a guy named Jerry Torchiano in particular being the main instigator of this incident. Tony sends Vito to deal with this issue while Carm and her father find out that they're forced to rebuild the spec house due to not using the proper lumber. And Carm gets pissed at her father for this while their father goes, well, back in my day, and walks away. Tony gets angry at Vesuvio about Phil continuing to be a pain in his ass while Ray Curto gives a tape of Tony talking about Angelo's murder to San Severino. And then he dies. I'm not kidding.
He said,
You know what's one thing I like about The Sopranos? Waste zero time. Like, yep, he's dead. Here's the funeral. Anyway.
Dick Barone died?
Lou Gehrig's disease.
You ever think what a coincidence it is that Lou Gehrig died of Lou Gehrig's disease?
You gonna make that same stupid joke every time that comes up?
Sorry.
I hope you like the moments of Tony being a miserable ass because it's only going to get worse from here. Gene goes up to Tony and is like, hey, how about that retirement, huh? As Tony says he's still thinking about it. And Rusty informs Tony of yet another guy who ratted out his crew, saying that Ray was a stand-up guy who would never rat out his crew like that. Gene and his wife argue about Tony not approving his move to Florida yet, with Deanne reminding Gene that they've been trying to escape the mob life for years while Tony's mob wife enjoys some fresh eel. Tony surprises Carm with a new Porsche and criticizes AJ the next day for letting his friend borrow a jacket. No, I'm sorry, I mean a jacket! Miserably saying that friends will always let you down and that you can only depend on your family, as if he didn't let Tony B down years back by not showing up to the robbery. I know, they made up for that already. I just needed a reason to shit on Tony. In our first Melfi session of the season, Tony talks about his uncle's declining mental state and laments that he used to be much smarter back in his heyday, and talks about how he saw an old lady getting pushed in a wheelchair and how it was undignified, saying he'd rather get smothered with a pillow instead of letting his loved ones take care of him, which Melfi says is interesting given the fact that Tony almost suffocated Livia with a pillow in the season 1 finale. And Tony's like, no, I didn't. Tony says that he still wants to take care of Junior, as Melfi tells Tony that he still hasn't quite gotten over how much of a bitch Livia was to him, saying that him pitying Junior and wanting to help despite him co-conspiring his murder with Livia is a result of Tony turning the blame back onto himself.
I pushed her over the edge.
By placing her in a lovely retirement community.
It's a nursing home.
No, Tony, it's a
Retirement community.
Wait, did he just correct retirement community with nursing home?
Retirement community.
It's a nursing home.
I've been doing this bit for 6 videos now, and this is how you repay me? What a sick joke. Melfi points out that it's easier for Tony to think Livia was justified in trying to murder him rather than accept the fact that Livia didn't truly love him, which Tony has no comeback for. And Tony tells Ginny's brother to talk to Johnny about the beating Hesh received and steals a pair of sunglasses from his store. Johnny, Ginny, and her brother talk about the financial troubles they're facing along with Jerry Torchiano's beef with Hesh, with Johnny getting pissed about this while smoking a cigarette since nicotine is an addictive substance. He looks at pictures of his daughter's bridal shower and gets emotional. And Phil finally meets with Tony, with Jerry claiming that the whole thing with Hesh was a misunderstanding as they agree to give $50K to Hesh's brother for his medical procedure. Gene gets Raising Cane's for the crew and talks to Chris like, Chris, my man, how about that me moving to Florida thing, huh? But Chris ignores him and asks Gene to whack a guy named Teddy who owes them money. Chris promises to put in a good word to Tony about Gene moving to Florida if the job's done right, as we get this subtle zoom in on the very sad looking Gene Pontecorvo. And Tony eats sushi for like the 14th time this episode. Later, Tony checks his weight and finds out that he's pushing his scale to the limit. And despite taking off some clothes, he's still well above what his scale can handle. Tony's questionable eating habits rear their ugly head once more as Carm says she wants to go to the sushi place again, with Tony admitting that he went there just a few hours ago. And Carm gets bummed out since she considered it to be their special place and changes her mind on going there. Gene meets Teddy at a restaurant and shoots poor Teddy in the fucking face. On the drive home, Gene struggles to wipe Teddy's blood off his face as he wipes it on a road map, possibly representing how Gene will never be able to truly escape the mob life and the guilt and harm that comes with it. And Vito talks to Silvio about his workout regimen and how Tony should join him sometime, which would probably be a good idea. Push it to the limit! We find out how truly evil Vito is as one of the big employees tells him to move his car out of the handicap spot. And Silvio informs Gene that Tony's not gonna let him move to Florida, with Gene saying that he literally just killed someone for the crew as Silvio ignores him and leaves. Vito rambles to Gene about him being the boss of the family one day as Gene silently reflects on how absolutely fucked he is. And Barbara tells Tony that he's gonna have to sit for Junior for the night and that he's been especially on edge today. And Tony becomes on edge himself as he throws a mild tantrum about this. Janice gets pissed at Bobby for his train set as Tony arrives and also gets pissed at Bobby for his train set. And he redirects the anger onto Janice for not looking after Junior. Janice points out that Tony was the one who refused to put Junior in a retirement community.
It's a nursing home.
And Tony gets angry at Janice for making a good argument and leaves. Angie and Carm reconcile with each other at Vesuvio as Artie reveals that him and Charmaine are getting back together, somehow. And Gene and Deanne argue over not being able to move to Florida anymore, with Gene trying to justify by saying that Florida probably would have sucked anyway. And Deanne changes the topic to Kevin and how he's still using, handing a needle she found under his bed. Gene still insists that Florida sucks as Deanne says that Tony is a piece of shit for not letting Gene and the family move.
For Tony to
Tony, why don't you kill him? Put a bullet in his fucking head.
I can't do that.
But you think I don't know that you've done it before?
Junior watches television as Tony enters the scene, with Junior claiming that Pussy Malenga keeps calling the house as Tony tells Junior to get his crazy ass upstairs and find his teeth. Gene tries making up to Deanne by saying that they could get a condo in Florida a year or two from now, an offer that Deanne is ecstatic about. She talks about how buying a condo is so much better than buying a house. Just kidding, she's still unhappy and passive-aggressively lets Gene answer a call on his phone. And it's revealed that Gene is an informant for the FBI, as he arrives to the car per the agent's orders on the phone. Agents Ron and San Severino tell Gene that he's going to be a bigger player in their operation than normal due to the death of Ray Curto, saying that he's not going to be able to move to Florida due to this, which Gene reluctantly obliges. In one of the saddest scenes of the show, Gene arrives home and looks through an album of family photos, drink in hand, reflecting on fond memories with his wife and kids. We get a shot of Gene staring off into the distance before... Yep, nope, not showing that one. This scene is such a raw and realistic depiction of suicide. There's no glorification, no dramatic angles, no corny orchestral music, just one still, unbroken shot. In just one episode, Gene transforms into one of the saddest characters in all of The Sopranos, leaving behind a broken family as his attempts to escape the mafia life with them fall flat. Gene's one of those characters that never had a ton of development but was always there with the crew. And part of me kind of wishes he had more material to work with in the show because the storyline in this episode was great. I think he knew deep down that he probably wasn't going to be making out of the game without doing some major damage to himself and the people around him. It's kind of hard to leave when you took an oath that specifically tells you not to leave. And that's another thing. While Gene's guilt for his actions, along with his failed attempts to move to Florida to make his family happy, are very difficult to watch, at the same time, Gene willingly entered the game knowing full well the consequences and the inconveniences that it would bring. Despite this though, I don't really blame Gene for feeling overwhelmed. Gene is in a particularly awful situation, facing significant problems on the family, business, and legal front. And it's kind of fucked up that Tony didn't even bother to tell him to his face that he can't move to Florida. He instead tells one of his flunkies to do it. It's hard not to feel sympathy for the guy, even if he knew very well what he was getting himself into when he became a made man. Tony dances in the kitchen while cooking dinner for Junior, and he calls down for Junior as Junior responds in a very distressed manner. I'm sure that probably doesn't mean anything though. Junior's kind of become this old geezer over the last few seasons, so the harm he could realistically do to Tony is likely minimal. Junior makes an incredible getaway as he shoves his gun under the bed and hides in the closet like a child who thought a pile of clothes across the room was the boogeyman. And Tony tries pulling himself up to grab the telephone, accidentally ripping the cord out of the wall as he loses his balance and falls on the floor. Oh, okay, well fuck that scene, I guess. See, this is another great thing about The Sopranos. Sometimes you'll have this extremely intense scene where everyone's dying and people are getting shot at and there's yelling and crying and screaming in anger, and then the show will just cut to someone eating dinner. It's kind of like life itself, isn't it? You could be going through one of the worst days of your life, and meanwhile someone out there miles away is in bed watching a YouTube video about The Sopranos. Oh yeah, that reminds me, make sure to smash that motherfucking like button and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to give the bell a little rainy dingity ding. Angie and Carm have a pleasant time discussing their cars as Angie reveals that she bought her car herself, which Carm doesn't look necessarily thrilled about. And we cut to Tony dying on the floor as he struggles to make his way to the phone in the kitchen. Tony musters up as much energy as he can to dial 911. And when they eventually pick up the phone, Tony is left with no energy to respond as the show slowly fades to black, ending the episode. Man, I forgot just how excellent of a season premiere this episode was. This was fantastic. I mentioned already how much I enjoyed Gene's storyline in this episode. It was definitely the biggest highlight for me. But the second biggest highlight, of course, has to be the ending. With Junior's paranoia of Pussy Malenga returning from the dead to kill him, culminating in him going, "Gazzada Malenga," and actually managing to land a bullet in Tony this time. Now that's what I call character development. If you're wondering what cazzata means, it's an Italian word that roughly means bullshit or stupid. He basically shot Tony the same way you'd swat a mosquito. Aw, stupid Tony. I love this scene so much. The acting from Dominic Canese and especially James Gandolfini do this moment wonders. I love the happy-go-lucky music playing in the background as Tony clings on to dear life and barely manages to phone the police. And I think about that moment where Junior locks himself in the closet and gives the same look a traumatized child would a lot. To think that Junior was once one of Tony's most formidable opponents, and now he's nothing more than a bumbling, sick old man. Junior's fall from grace makes him one of the most memorable characters from the show in my eyes. This scene kind of loses some of its intensity on rewatch, but man is it scary to watch on a first viewing. The writing and acting overall in this episode was pretty fantastic, and there were a handful of great and memorable moments from this episode. Like the opening montage, Chris's Lou Gehrig joke, Gene murdering Teddy followed by him wiping the blood off his face and on to New York. Is that foreshadowing for something? Haha, maybe. Bobby establishing his love for trains, and of course, the aforementioned scene of Junior giving Tony a shot. I'm surprised to say this, I'm putting this episode at the top of S tier. I don't think it's quite double S tier material, but it's close. Season 6, Episode 2. Join the club.
Woke up this morning, got
yourself
be
a...
right.
Wait. We open up on Tony sleeping in what appears to be a hotel room bed, fully clothed. And he witnesses a beacon briefly flash in front of him. He stops at the bar for a drink and calls his family, who sound nothing like his family.
Hi, you reached the Sopranos. Leave a message. Bye. Stop picking your nose.
I'm here. Call me.
Wait, Tony sounds nothing like Tony either. Wait, didn't you just get shot last episode? Well, anyways, as Tony walks out of the hotel, a helicopter loudly whirs above him and shines a bright light on top of him. And Tony thinks that's weird for a second before walking away. The next day, Tony, I think that's Tony, heads to a work conference and gets his ID checked. And he realizes that he has somebody else's wallet, as the ID he just handed over belongs to one Kevin Finnerty, a man who looks very similar to Tony. I wouldn't be surprised if this guy was just James Gandolfini's stunt double in real life. Not only does he have the wrong wallet, but he also has the wrong briefcase. And while Tony tries persuading the lady at the table to let him through, she says that she can't allow it.
I can't let you in without photo ID, sir. Security.
I'm on the list.
Sorry. It's a whole new world.
A whole new world, huh? Tony tries calling Carm to explain the situation, who also sounds nothing like the actual Carmela. And he says that his whole life was in his briefcase as Carm tells him not to worry too much. He goes back to the hotel to get his wallet back to no avail. And he tries asking the hotel's bartender if he might have left his stuff there by accident. Also to no avail. He brings up the name Kevin Finnerty as a guy across the bar makes a joke saying he drives a Lexus, since Kev Infinity kind of sounds like Infinity, referring to another popular luxury car brand called Infinity. Kind of a stupid joke that makes no sense at all. If his name sounds like Infinity, then why would you say he drives a Lexus? They aren't even run by the same company. Those are two completely different brands of car. Okay, I'm getting a little sidetracked. It's actually kind of interesting that the show points out that his name sounds like Infinity, but we'll get back to that later. Tony gets a drink and asks the bartender about Costa Mesa, the city that Tony's flown to for the conference. A question that receives a very interesting response from the bartender.
Nice place to live.
Around here? It's dead.
Tony eats a sandwich at the bar and is offered by the guy who made that joke earlier along with other businessmen to eat with them. And Tony only joins along after getting the hots for this lady. During dinner, Tony gets a call from Carm, who informs him that nobody named Finnerty has contacted the Soprano household yet. And when Tony arrives back at the table, we watch this very interesting exchange.
I'm 46 years old. I mean, who am I? Where am I going?
Join the club.
I think there might be a deeper meaning to all of this. As they walk out of the restaurant, Tony notices a television segment titled Are Sin, Disease, and Death Real? And Tony kisses the lady in the parking lot, who says that this relationship can't be due to Tony's connection to his family. Tony laments that he could have gotten away with it if he was a different person altogether. Interesting choice of words. And the helicopter comes back to shine a bright light on Tony. The bright lights are revealed to represent the shining lights of the hospital room as we transition to Tony freaking out and ripping tubes off his face, asking Carmela who he is and where he's going. The first 11 minutes of this episode are revealed to be a part of a coma sequence that we'll be seeing more of soon. I'll be saving my thoughts and perspective of what I think Tony's coma dreams represent later on in the video, so stay tuned for that. Tony continues repeating the questions who he is and where he's going as the doctors tell a terrified Carmen Meadow to leave, with the two telling AJ that Tony is not in good condition right now. Carmen informs the rest of the mafia guys of Tony's current condition, and the doctor gives Carmen an update on Tony, saying that Tony's blood has been infected with sepsis, explaining why parts of his face look disgusting and discolored, and tells Carmen that there's not a very big chance of Tony making it out of this situation alive. We get this powerful piece of acting from Edie Falco as Carmen begins to cry, overwhelmed by this ordeal as Chris comforts her. Back in the coma, Tony walks into a different hotel and checks in under the name Kevin Finnerty. Two Buddhist monks stand in the distance watching the scene unfold, and they later walk up to Tony before he enters the elevator, saying that they're filing a suit against Mr. Finnerty due to Finnerty's heating system being faulty, saying that Finnerty ignored their phone calls for months as a calm and friendly debate begins to emerge.
Lose your arrogance.
Son of a bitch! Hey, come on, guys. See, hit me!
Tony later calls Carmen and recounts the incident to her, saying that he can't call the cops since he's technically committing identity fraud. And Carmen says that this whole debacle is partly Tony's fault due to his obsession with work and how he is off in his own world. And the next day, Tony falls down the stairs and dies. Back in real life, Dr. Pepper informs the family that Tony might suffer from brain damage if he actually manages to get through this situation alive. And he tells Carmen Meadow to keep Tony engaged by talking to him or playing music for him. Janice arrives at the hospital and predictably has a meltdown after seeing the ginormous hole in Tony's stomach. Which, you know, I don't blame her. And Junior has his mental state evaluated by an interrogator, with Junior claiming that Tony was the one who shot himself due to his depression. Yes, shooting yourself in the stomach, as we all know, is the quickest and most painless way to go. We cut to Jean's funeral as the crew discusses the current Tony situation, with Silvio taking up the role as acting boss, and says to keep any questions about themselves to themselves for the time being. Vito asks a question about himself and says he should get ownership of Jean's sportsbook operation, and tries putting Bobby on the spot by asking why he wasn't at Junior's place to sit for him that night, to which Bobby responds by saying that Tony volunteered. After the meeting, Paulie, Chris, and Silvio complain about Vito, with Paulie pointing out that the sportsbook is supposed to go to Bobby, not Vito, and Hesh talks about Jean's suicide at the hospital, with Vito speculating that that Gene was gay and had no one to talk with about it. AJ talks with the press about the situation as Carm drags him away and tells him not to talk with the press about the situation. And she later talks to Tony about the family while setting up the radio, saying that Meadow in particular has matured and learned so much over the past few years as she plays Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple, the same song that Tony was listening to in the season 2 premiere before passing out. She sadly looks at Tony while the song plays in the background as Chris talks with Agent Harris, who talks to Chris about his new position in counterterrorism duty and the disease he caught in Pakistan, explaining his vomiting at the beginning of last episode. And Chris speculates that Harris only comes to the pork store since he misses the crew, which Harris interestingly doesn't retort. The show cuts back to Carm talking to Tony in the hospital in the early morning hours, reflecting on fond childhood memories with him, Artie, and Charmaine as music plays from the radio. She tells Tony that he's going to make it through in the end and continues reminiscing on romantic memories between the two of them. And she apologizes to Tony for saying that he was going to hell when he died all the way back in the pilot episode, an incident that Tony brought up during one of their fights in Whitecaps, telling Tony that she feels tremendous guilt for telling him such a thing, even though it's probably true.
It's a sin, and I will be judged for it.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely a sin, but I have a feeling you might get a pass on that one.
You're a good father. You care about your friends.
I really doubt that.
Yes, it's been rough between us.
You could say that again.
But you are not going to hell.
No, you were right the first time. He definitely is. We return back to the coma sequence as Kevin Finnerty wakes up in the hospital after his epic tumble, where the doctor informs Kevin that a recent MRI has revealed that Kevin is developing Alzheimer's. He claims to the doctor that he isn't the real Kevin Finnerty, and when the doctor asks what his real name is, Kevin says that it doesn't matter since Alzheimer's will make him forget anyway. Kevin yells "I'm lost" at the doctor while he leaves the room as we cut back to reality, where Meadow talks to Tony and reads a poem to him. The next day, the Soprano family as well as the Soprano crew eat at the Soprano household as Vito farts on the Soprano couch, and AJ criticizes Meadow for not being familiar with hybrid cars as Meadow asks why the fuck he's talking about hybrid cars, with Meadow saying that she's been up all night as AJ delivers Olivia like "poor you," showing that Olivia's misery didn't rub off on only one person named Anthony. The two argue briefly for a moment before AJ changes the subject to how embarrassing the whole situation is, and he tells the reporters out the window to fuck themselves. AJ complains to Carm that she's not letting him see Tony as Carm says that AJ didn't seem interested, with AJ claiming that he was busy studying, and Rosalie tells Carm that she's protecting AJ too much, saying that AJ is going to regret not pulling his weight and helping his father if Tony doesn't come through in the end.
The thing is, Tony has an open incision. If you are there in the room when they change the dressing, it's very hard to take. And I don't know that AJ should see that.
Okay, I understand that, but I still think your son should. Oh my god! The police ask Carm about Tony's relationship with Junior as Meadow talks to Finn over the phone about his difficulties with dental school. And AJ later heads to the hospital and watches Janice sob while leaving Tony's room. AJ finally speaks with Tony face to face. Hey, is that piss leaking onto his gown? What a horrible catheter. Okay, anyways. And Carm watches AJ talk to his father from afar, having a heartfelt, emotional reconnection to Tony.
The Shelby GT500, 450 horsepower. Oh, baby.
We're introduced to friends of Christopher, Ahmed, and Muhammad at the Bing as they ask how Tony's doing. And we cut to the hospital, with AJ still sitting in his chair with a blanket. Before he leaves the room, AJ vows to Tony that he's going to kill Junior, saying that Junior can't just get away with it and that Tony always treated Junior with respect, which... And Carm meets AJ outside the room, thanking him and saying that this helps Tony and the family a lot. AJ decides that this is the perfect time to admit that he flunked out of school, which predictably sours Carm's mood as she tells AJ to get the fuck out of her sight. Carm comforts Tony and asks if he can hear his family, and we cut back to the coma, where Kevin settles down with a bandage on his forehead. He picks up the phone to make a call, but changes his mind and places it down, and he watches the beacon out the window as the show cuts to black. Ending the episode. This episode was pretty great. My favorite moment of this episode has got to be the scene where Carm monologues to Tony how much he loves him and the regret she feels for telling him that he's going to hell when he dies. Edie Falco in particular was spectacular in this episode. Every time I saw her on screen, I could practically feel the unbearable weight of grief, shock, and dread that Carm felt on her shoulders during this episode. And that's thanks to the great writing and the even better performance delivered by Edie Falco. Of course, the other standout material in this episode has to be the coma dream sequences. That first segment of this episode must have been so confusing to watch back when the show first aired, because the first time I watched this episode, I was so weirded out. It feels kind of weird to call these dream sequences because they don't really function like the normal Sopranos dream sequences at all. They actually have a coherent plot and continuity, and the characters speak like normal characters. That's not to say that there aren't any weird or interesting elements to analyze though, because there definitely are. Like I mentioned earlier though, I want to save my discussion of what I think these sequences represent later, since there's a few pieces of the puzzle that we need to go through before we can draw any conclusions. I like the fact that James Gandolfini speaks with his actual voice in this episode rather than Tony's usual accent throughout the coma sequences. And I still think the moment where Carm looks at AJ talking to Tony thinking he's participating in a heart-to-heart with them, only for him to be talking about cars, is one of the show's most underrated bits of comedy. While I think that this whole plotline with Tony hits a lot harder on a first viewing rather than on rewatch, since much like the characters themselves, you also don't know for sure whether or not Tony will make it out alive, the material this episode delivers is still pretty good overall. I'm feeling a nice A tier. Season 6, Episode 3, Mayham. Oh man, how long was I out? Well, anyways, let's open up my YouTube channel real quick. What? Rebice? Paulie listens to Beat Rice videos in his car as Vito pulls up, and he calls Vito fat before Vito gives Paulie the location of a group of Colombian drug dealers. And Paulie and this other guy storm the place, guns blazing, with Paulie shooting this guy in the neck before getting his nuts kicked outside in. Paulie crawls around the place in agony trying to help find some money. And right before they call it quits, they end up finding a gargantuan pile of cash in the dishwasher. At the hospital, Chris and Bobby confront AJ for trying to buy a gun, saying that they understand his frustration, but that he needs to channel that anger into something a little less destructive. Carm asks AJ for a favor, and AJ gets a little miffed about it.
Hey, did you bring me my sweater?
Your sweater? And Jesus fuck!
AJ subtly accuses Carm of being the one who tipped off Bobby and Chris about AJ's murder plot. And Carm tries telling the doctor that she swore she saw Tony's eyebrows move, as Dr. Pepper tells Carm that Tony is still a long ways away from a full recovery. Back in the coma dream, Kevin receives a Supreme Court summons from the monastery belonging to the Buddhist monks we saw earlier, and fools around over, once again trying to tell them that he's not Kevin Finnerty, but that he's worried that he might have done something wrong, mentioning his recent Alzheimer's diagnosis. Kevin says he arrived there to try and get some info on the real Kevin Finnerty, but the monks tell Kevin that they need someone to be pissed at for their home being cold all winter, and tell Kevin that they're proceeding with a lawsuit. In real life, Carm heads to the grocery store and runs into Dr. Melfi, who offers Carm her support should she ever need it in the future. You know, I gotta say, it is so weird seeing Dr. Melfi out in a public area surrounded by strangers. It's kind of like seeing your teacher from high school outside of class. It just feels surreal and out of place. Benny informs Silvio at his place of the incident with the Colombian drug dealers, saying that they hit the jackpot with over $1 million in cash. And Silvio later talks with Gabriella about his worries about being acting boss. Gabriella reassures Silvio and tells him that he could do a great job in this position. And Silvio reveals that Jackie Aprile Sr. considered making Silvio the boss before Tony, but that he turned it down, saying that he felt he wouldn't fit the position. At the hospital, Vito complains that Bobby's making collections of what was formerly Gene's revenue stream as Silvio tells him to shut up. And Vito tries confronting Paulie for his promised cut of cash as Paulie also tells him to shut up. Bobby and Vito complain to Silvio about where Gene's cash is going, and Silvio rules that 20% of the earnings will go to Vito while the rest go to Bobby for the time being, which they agree to. Back in Coma Land, Kevin drinks at the bar and tells the bartender that he's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, pointing out that his uncle also has Alzheimer's and that it might be hereditary. Kevin asks the bartender if he truly was Kevin Finnerty after all, though drops the topic pretty quickly as the bartender gets back to work, with Kevin staring at the beacon out the window once again. AJ and Meadow have some pizza in Tony's room while Silvio reads a newspaper on the toilet. This is such a strange trope that seemingly every TV show or movie or whatever has, in my opinion. You're gonna be in the bathroom for like 2 minutes tops. Why even bother bringing a newspaper? You gotta fold it and then unfold it back together. It's all big and awkward. What happens if a page slips out from the side and falls into a pile of piss? Then what? Are you gonna pick it up? Plus, when you're done, you gotta wash your hands afterward. How are you gonna deal with that? Every public bathroom in history has like 2 gallons of water spilled over the sink minimum. So not only is your newspaper gonna be dirty from your disgusting germ-laden hands, but you're also more than likely not even gonna have a place to set it down. And come to think of it, why would you bring a coffee into the bathroom? You're gonna get piss and shit particles in it. Silvio tries enjoying a nice shit before getting interrupted by Vito, who says that Carm should probably receive a cut of the profits on Tony's behalf, which Silvio agrees with. Things turn sour quickly once Paulie enters the scene, however, as Paulie and Vito bicker over who should get more money from the bus, and Silvio tells them to stop arguing, saying that it splits half and half and that Carm will receive $100K from Paulie and Vito's cut, which they agree to. We're reintroduced to JT Dolan as his class gets ransacked by Benny and Chris's AA guy, and they drag him to a car, where Chris forces JT to co-write a new horror movie with him in order to wipe off his debts that he still owes Chris. They mention that horror movies are making bank right now, with Benny mentioning that Saw made $100 million on a budget of only $400,000. General Jigsaw would be proud, and says that the movie would be about a mafia guy who gets murdered and then comes back to life and gets revenge on everyone, including his ex-fiancée, who was playing Battleship with his boss the night he was murdered. Well, doesn't that sound a little familiar? Silvio informs Carm that she's gonna be receiving a hefty sum of cash soon, with Carm thanking him, saying that insurance won't pay for physical therapy. She brings Silvio into Tony's room, with Tony looking as cheerful as ever, and Silvio silently worries to himself while Vito and Phil eat dinner that night, with Vito complaining that Silvio's ruling more in Carmela's favor with the revenue rather than his actual earners. Phil unsurprisingly changes the conversation to that animal blundetto before getting back on topic, with Vito saying that he doesn't want to give Carmela $100,000 and then have Tony die the day after. He contemplates shorting Carmela as Phil tells him that he can't think that way. And Paulie puts ice on his balls as he similarly complains about having to give Carm money. The next day, Silvio calls Paulie and reminds him to give Carm the money, saying that he knows who he's dealing with as Paulie obliges while cutting out coupons as if he's not already well off money-wise.
Fucking baby.
In Coma Land, Kevin tells Carm about the lawsuit as well as his tumble down the stairs earlier, and almost reveals his Alzheimer's diagnosis before lying and saying it was a mild concussion. While Carm wants to meet Kevin there, Kevin tells her not to as he looks at an invitation to Affinity family reunion. In Reality Land, JT meets with Chris, Carmine Jr. and a bunch of other mob guys for an investment meeting, pitching the slasher mafia movie that Chris explained to him earlier, which JT has named Cleaver. The mob guys are confused about how the movie works and whether the main character is a ghost or not and how his body parts fuse back together, and they come up with suggestions for the script while Artie delivers some food to the hospital. Paulie greets Carm and puts her in a good mood, though that good mood immediately evaporates when Carm notices a news piece on TV about Tony's incident, with quotes that AJ gave to the reporter last episode being mentioned in the piece. She storms to the house later that night and yells at AJ for talking with the press. And while AJ claims that they misquoted him, Carm tells AJ that he's nothing but a cross to bear on his entire family. A comment that might be even worse than Tony's male heir comment from back in season 2, even if AJ kinda deserves it. Carm's dad criticizes her for saying this before Carm tells him to suck it and stomps to her room, crying in a pillow as she's overcome with sadness and anger. Bobby arrives at Silvio's house in the middle of the night to complain that the new arrangement isn't making him enough money, and Silvio tells Bobby that he'll come up with a compromise in the morning as Bobby angrily walks out, leaving Silvio literally speechless as he starts hacking up a lung from asthma despite ripping his inhaler. We're finally given another Carm and Melfi meeting, where Carm talks about the situation with Tony and Jr. as well as the spat between her and AJ a few moments ago. She says that she feels bad about what she said and how things have become so different since AJ and Meadow have grown up, resenting the fact that they have to facade their way through life thanks to their father's connections, which Melfi points out Carm has had to do as well. Carm tells Melfi that she knew Tony was affiliated with the mob the moment she met him, saying that she doesn't know if she loved him despite this fact or because of this fact.
You know, I'd go to my priest and I would cry and say how bad I felt about how my husband made his money, but that was bullshit.
Oh?
Because there are far bigger crooks than my husband.
Oh. Carm recounts her telling Tony that she loved him last episode, with Melfi asking if she's afraid that her feelings may change when he wakes up, which Carm doesn't answer, though she agrees with Melfi that things have been better between her and Tony. Silvio gets carried away by paramedics after ripping his vape too hard, and Vito wastes no time and starts telling Larry Barisi that he's the most capable of overtaking the throne should Tony shit the bed. He also lies to Carmela and says that they shouldn't be moving large quantities of money around right now due to people looking over their shoulders. And Paulie finally meets Tony in one of the funniest moments of the show.
Oof, Maron, he looks terrible.
Uncle Paulie.
Meadow leaves Paulie to talk with Tony, who kicks off the conversation by talking about his balls. He says that the doctor said they thankfully didn't explode and continues rambling on about business and other personal stuff nobody really cares about. And Tony's heart rate starts increasing exponentially while Finn arrives at the hospital, with Vito immediately confronting him out of the gate and doing a similar, "Am I gonna kill you? Am I gonna fuck you? I don't know," routine from season 5, lightly brushing his arm before Finn is saved by Meadow. Paulie remains completely oblivious to the fact that Tony's heart rate is going up, while Kevin in Coma Land tells the next door neighbors in the hotel to shut up, obtaining directions to the Finnerty family reunion while his heart rate in real life continues skyrocketing.
The fuck?
We're given this chaotic scene of the doctors rushing to save Tony from cardiac arrest with a defibrillator, and we transition back into Coma Land, where Kevin heads to the Finnerty family reunion. When he finally arrives, he witnesses kids running about while the adults mingle inside, and he talks to Tony B? Okay, so this isn't technically Tony B. The credits simply list Steve Buscemi as man. Very creative. He tells Kevin that his family is inside and that he's going home, which Kevin thinks is weird. He notices a woman in the doorframe who walks away before we can see her face, and Kevin's eyes begin to well up a bit while the man tries grabbing his briefcase, saying that he can't bring it inside as Kevin suddenly hears a voice call out to him. He says that he feels scared while the man insists on taking the briefcase, and he's suddenly engulfed by a large, bright light before.
Please don't leave us, Daddy. We love you.
He's out of the coma! Yeah! Yeah! Yeah!
Before we move on, I think it's about time we finally discuss these coma sequences and what the hell they mean, or at least what I think they mean. I believe that these scenes are meant to represent something of a spiritual reawakening with Tony. Throughout the past few episodes, Tony asked both in his coma and briefly in real life multiple times questions like who he is and where he's going, and even at one point claiming to the doctor that he's lost. There's a very clear theme of missing identity present throughout the coma sequences, to the point that even we as an audience never truly know if Tony really was Kevin Finnerty or if he was simply Tony all along. The show never outright confirms this, which I believe was intentional. And that theme of missing identity is hammered in even more with Tony/Kevin's later diagnosis of Alzheimer's. I believe that the coma dreams are a manifestation of Tony's subconscious questioning who he truly is as a person and what his ultimate goals in life are. People who have near-death experiences often report coming out the other end a significantly changed person, which makes sense since, you know, they died almost, along with gaining a stronger sense of purpose in life. And I believe that these dreams were Tony's subconscious's way of steering him in the right direction, or at least a better one. Throughout the coma, Tony is given many hints that he is, in fact, in a coma through numerous subtle lines of dialogue, like the lady at the conference saying that they're in a whole new world, the bartender telling Tony that around here it's dead, possibly referring to Tony's very low level of brain activity in the real world as a result of him getting shot, along with fake Carm on the phone saying that Tony is off in his own world. These dreams are meant to give Tony a new sense of perspective in his life, as Tony not only no longer works in the mafia and instead has a typical job, but there were also practically zero recognizable faces from Tony's life that appeared throughout the sequences, other than Tony B, of course. The only mildly recognizable people that appear throughout the coma are family members of Tony's, and even then, those family members differ greatly from the ones that we as an audience are familiar with. Even Tony B isn't technically Tony B in this sequence. He's just some guy. He's further pressured into questioning who he truly is, as the Buddhist monks, who, if I had to speculate, are probably much smarter and wiser than Tony, accuse him of being the true Kevin Finnerty. And even further when he receives the aforementioned Alzheimer's diagnosis from the doctor. All of these scenes ultimately lead to the scene that we just witnessed, with the man telling Tony to let go of his briefcase, which Tony once again reiterates contains his whole life in there. I believe that the ending represents Tony's subconscious grappling with whether or not to enter the afterlife, as one side persuades him to let go while another begs him to stay. Of course, it's revealed that those cries were coming from Meadow all along rather than being a creation of Tony's mind, but the fact that Tony's subconscious decided to let those words enter his brain still remains. When Paulie was rambling on earlier, Tony's subconscious blacked out basically everything he was saying, leaving nothing but a bassy mumble that Tony demands to shut up. And yet Meadow's voice could be heard loud and clear, albeit much younger sounding like it was shown last episode. Whether or not the Finnerty household is meant to represent heaven or hell is up to interpretation, but considering the fact that the woman who leaves before we can see her face is more than likely Livia, it's probably hell. Of course, like many other moments in The Sopranos, the coma sequence has been the subject of speculation, fan theories, what it truly means, who am I, where am I going, yada yada yada. And one theory that I also think is interesting takes a more religious approach. The theory states that the coma sequence is meant to represent purgatory, with the beacon representing the light of heaven while the Finnerty household is meant to represent hell. I personally thought that the beacon was more of a result of outside stimulus, like the beeping of the monitor next to him or something like that. Kind of like how the helicopter is meant to represent shining lights on Tony's face, but it representing heaven also makes sense. There are a few subtle lines of dialogue that actually support this theory pretty well, like the moment when the businessman pointed out that Kevin Finnerty kind of sounds like infinity, which could be referring to purgatory itself and how people can live there for an indefinite amount of time. There's also the line delivered by one of the Buddhist monks later on that states that Kevin Finnerty had been ignoring their calls for months, which could refer to Tony refusing to answer to a higher power and confront his sins. Maybe a stretch, but hey, I think it's interesting. This sequence is by far been one of the most difficult ones to dissect out of any in the show, because with the normal dream sequences, there are various characters and plot elements that tie back to the real world throughout the dream. With the coma sequence, we've entered a whole new world. Oh, foreshadowing. Oh. That's chock full of new faces and never before seen characters, with even the returning characters varying wildly from the ones we're familiar with, which makes creating connections and theories a lot harder. Of course, there definitely are plot points and characters that tie back to the show's reality, but my point remains. Shit's hard. Paulie explains the situation to the crew as Bobby informs them that Tony's conscious, which they loudly celebrate, except for Vito. Vito angrily eats carrots that night before Paulie enters the Spatafori household with bags of Colombian drug dealer money, saying they need to get the money to Carmela's stats, and someone might have said something to Tony about the cash during the coma. The family happily surrounds a conscious Tony in the hospital, and he asks Carmela if he's dead, which Carm says is not the case. Paulie and Vito give Carm her cut of the money, putting on a smile in front of her, but then looking miserable moments later, which Carm notices as she looks back. Chris tries engaging in conversation with Tony and notices a card on the wall that contains a saying by the Ojibwe tribe. Sometimes I go about in pity for myself, and all the while, a great wind carries me across the sky. which essentially means that in spite of hard times we face, there's still a grander purpose to our existence to be fulfilled. Connecting back to Tony's previous questioning of the direction his life is taking in his coma dreams, Chris informs Tony that he's gonna try taking another stab at the movie industry, which Chris acknowledges Tony didn't like the last time he thought of doing this, saying that he believes Tony owes him this after what happened with Adriana. Tony doesn't say a word, which makes sense because he looks like shit, and Carm gently wipes Tony's lips with a cotton swab as a cover of Somewhere Over the Rainbow plays in the background, and the show fades to black, ending the episode. Another great episode. I know I've already gone pretty in-depth about the coma sequences, but I don't think I've given my thoughts on how I feel about them. Drumroll, please. I mean, they're good. I think they definitely saved the best scene for last with Affinity Family Reunion, because that is easily one of the best scenes of the episode. I personally vastly prefer the usual dream sequences compared to the coma scenes, simply because of how strange and weird they can get, while also containing bits and pieces of symbolism that connect back to the Sopranos reality. Some subtle, some not even remotely subtle. The coma sequences, for the most part anyway, function like your typical Sopranos scene, which is kind of interesting in its own right, but again, if we're comparing the coma dreams to the regular dreams, it's not even a contest. The coma scenes are still very good regardless though. The rest of this episode is also pretty great. JT Dolan returning to the story is very fun to see, and I still think Paulie and Vito bitching and moaning that they have to kick up 20% of $500,000 is really funny. I like how this episode dedicates more time to develop Vito's character a bit, as he sneakily tries making big money moves under everybody's noses, like trying to keep his $100,000 to himself by initially lying to Carmela about not being able to exchange any money, along with trying to boost himself in the rankings as the next in line for Tony's throne. I still think Paulie being the catalyst behind Tony eventually gaining consciousness is one of the show's most underrated moments. Imagine being so annoying that you wake someone out of a coma. I also like how the show dedicates some time to Silvio's character as well, as he struggles with his role as Skip and ends up letting the stress of the job get to him through his asthma. This episode also introduces us to the Cleaver plotline, which I personally think is a highlight of season 6, but I'm getting too ahead of myself. Even with Tony in the hospital, Mayham manages to do a ton with its characters and its story, which is why I'm feeling a light S tier. Season 6, episode 4, the fleshy part of the thigh.
Got yourself a gun, got yourself a gun, got yourself a gun, got yourself a gun.
Tony gets his big belly hole worked on as he looks back over at the Ojibwe saying, claiming that he's only kept it up there because Meadow likes it, as the doctor points out a rapper named Deluxe being rolled by next to the room, saying that he got shot 7 times outside of a club. Carm gives Tony a book on dinosaurs as Tony quickly becomes invested like he's Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. And we're taken to Barone's Sanitation, where we learn that Dick Barone's son Jason now runs the company, who wants to make some changes to the company as we're given this absolutely glorious picture of Paulie accepting an award for excellence in recycling. Tony gets pissy at Janice for putting the Ojibwe quote on the walls. Janice tells him that she didn't, and Tony makes fun of Bobby's choo-choo trains before saying that Bobby will eventually be judged on his own merit, essentially saying that he can't be in Tony's good graces just because he's his brother-in-law. We're reintroduced to Janice's prayer group friend and introduced to prayer group leader Bob Brewster, who recounts his traumatic past and how he was saved by accepting the Lord as his savior, pushing Tony to do the same as they pray for Tony. E major. Tony is put under for surgery as Jason later meets Tony in the hospital, where him, Tony, and Paulie catch up with old childhood memories before discussing Jason's plan to sell Barone Sanitation to Chinelli Sanitation, a company associated with Johnny Sack, saying that he should wait for Tony to leave the hospital before making any deals, as Tony says that he doesn't want to see Jason get hurt. Paulie heads to Nunzar Russ and meets his Aunt Dottie, who's not in particularly good condition, and she makes the stunning confession to Paulie that Nucci is not his real mother. She admits that, despite her status as a nun, she got pregnant during the war and that Paulie is her biological son, which upsets Paulie greatly. A lady representing Tony's insurance carrier walks into Tony's room and says that they want to get Tony out of the hospital as soon as possible since shit's expensive, saying that they performed a wallet biopsy on Tony as Tony calls her a c***. Later, Tony overhears Deluxe crying in his hospital room because of his injuries as his associates try cheering him up by saying that getting shot will do wonders for his street cred. And meanwhile, Bobby overhears this other rapper writing a song in the hospital, who laments to Bobby that Deluxe was going to produce his album but that he's gotten distracted with the whole getting shot thing. Paulie confronts his non-biological mother at the nursing home, with Nucci initially denying it before confessing that it's true, saying that she's always loved Paulie as Paulie calls Nucci a fraud and Aunt Dottie a hua. Nucci says that she did this to help Aunt Dottie become a nun as Paulie claims that he's been victimized and storms away. And Bobby meets with the other rapper from earlier and pitches the idea of him getting shot so that his street cred will get boosted, somewhere on the fleshy part of the thigh, which the rapper thinks is a crazy idea and leaves. We're reintroduced to Silvio as he's recovered from his asthma attack from last episode, and we're given this absolutely amazing exchange between Father Phil and Paulie.
Excuse me. Hi. You're a friend of Anthony's. I was just about to visit him. How's he doing?
He's in a lot better shape than those fucking nuns you got up there.
What makes this moment even funnier is that this is the last appearance of Father Phil in The Sopranos. His final moment in the show is getting cursed out by Paulie for quite literally no reason. God, I love this show. Tony meets a man named John Schwinn, a man who attended Bell Labs, and Deluxe gets pushed by and invites Tony over to his room to watch a boxing match on TV later. Tony gets pissed at Phil for trying to poach Baron's sanitation, as Phil claims that, with Johnny losing a lot of his assets, he's fighting tooth and nail to keep any semblance of cash he can. And the two eventually come to a deal, with Paulie preoccupied with the news of his mother. Paulie informs Tony that his not technically Aunt Dottie just died, and Tony gives his condolences, asking multiple questions about Dottie and how things with nuns work, as Paulie gives very short responses and looks on in anger. Back in Tony's room, we find out the real reason Tony was pissed about the wallet biopsy from earlier, as he accuses the paramedic of stealing $2 grand from his wallet and giving him a week to return the cash in full. AJ and Carm deliver the good news that they've made up after the crust a bear argument from earlier and that AJ got a job at Blockbuster. And later, Tony, Paulie, and Schwinn watch the match at Deluxe's room, with Paulie calling boxing a life of abuse and that it's no different than dealing with your family, bringing up Tony getting shot by Junior despite the good he did for him and that family's always gonna screw you over in the end, clearly coping with the recent news. Schwinn suddenly switches the conversation to smart people stuff, talking about how everything is connected and how things only seem separate due to our consciousness, a statement that sticks with Tony. Phil and Johnny complain about Tony wanting to stay on Baron Sanitation's payroll, saying that the sale is going through no matter what, but that he's willing to keep Tony as waste management consultant for 2 years, along with letting him keep 5% of the sales price. Tony gets enraged at this offer and tells Paulie to tell Jason that he'd better understand his obligation before he sells, and gets so angry that he pukes everywhere. Paulie and Patsy meet Jason by the river and warn Jason that he'd better not sell the company due to the contract being far less valuable than Tony and his crew want, intimidating Jason and saying that he should have listened to Tony in the first place. Jason tries and fails to back out of the deal as Chanelli tells Jason to suck his dick, and Paulie tells Tony to deal with his mother and his aunt, saying that Nucci adopted him to save the family from shame and claiming that he feels like his entire life is just one big joke. Later that night, Paulie storms over to Nucci's and tells her that Dottie can rot in hell, saying that he went without so that Nucci could have, even though he just made 400 grand last episode, and throws Nucci's flat screen TV out the window, telling her that he's no longer providing for her and leaving Nucci in tears. Paulie and Tony get pissed at Jason for letting the deal go through, and later, Bobby makes a deal with a rapper from earlier to stage the shooting in the fleshy part of the thigh, with the rapper only giving 7 grand of the promised 8 and telling Bobby not to tell him when the shot's coming. Pastor Bob returns to Tony's room and hands him a book called Born Again by Charles Colson, who was one of the main guys involved in the Watergate scandal, who Tony says one of his friends did time with. The book details Colson's turn to Christianity after his time in prison, and Pastor Bob tells Tony that salvation isn't just about being saved from damnation, but from being saved from yourself while you're still on Earth, and offers Tony to join them at church once he's out of the hospital, which Tony says maybe to. He notices Tony's dinosaur book and claims that humans and dinosaurs coexisted, saying that the world was created 6,000 years ago, as Tony says that a lot of scientists would disagree with him, bringing up carbon dating before Pastor Bob tells him to read about Coulson and leaves the room. Tony later meets with Schwinn again and references the Ojibwe quote and how they say a great wind is carrying them, and mentions that it paralleled the feeling that he felt right before waking from his coma, saying that he felt like he was being pulled towards something and that he doesn't want that feeling again. He also mentions Carm saying that he asked who he is and where he's going, as Schwinn reveals that he's been diagnosed with laryngeal cancer, asking Tony if he can whack him before passing it off as a joke. Tony complains about Vito shitting too much before talking to Paulie about his issues with Dottie and Nucci, with Tony pointing out that Nucci took care of Paulie growing up and loved him like he truly was her son. He says that Paulie keeps going about and pitying for himself, referencing the Ojibwe quote again, saying that Paulie is a part of something much bigger. Meanwhile, Bobby finally shoots the rapper in the fleshy part of the thigh.
I shot in her butt.
Imagine paying someone $7,000 to shoot you in the ass. You can't really make a good rap song out of that. I got shot in the ass and it fucking hurt. The insurance lady comes into the room and reveals to Tony that Schwinn had his larynx surgically removed, and Dick Baron's wife meets with him in the hospital, taking the blame for Jason's mishap with the business by admitting that her and Dick kept Jason in the dark about how the business worked. She desperately pleads to Tony to keep Jason from harm as Paulie finds himself driven to tears at this display of emotion. Tony is finally taken out of the hospital in a wheelchair, and they stop by Schwinn's room, with Chris offering Tony to say goodbye as Tony decides not to. The paramedic gives Tony the $2 grand they demanded from him earlier before Tony passes on this, and Tony takes in the outside air, telling Janice how lucky he is to not have been killed and saying that, from now on, every day is a gift. Phil meets Tony at his house and tells him that Johnny has offered Tony to keep him on the sanitation payroll for 10 years, plus 12% of the sales price, which Tony agrees to. He walks out into his backyard and sits on a chair while the wind blows, appreciating the nature around him while Paulie beats the shit out of Jason and demands he kick $4 grand up to him per month, and he walks off as the show fades to black, ending the episode. This episode is alright. I kind of wish we got more time with Schwinn in this episode because I found his character to be really intriguing, at least until he ripped his voice box right out of him. It's fascinating watching Tony interact and entertain the thoughts of someone like Schwinn, contrasted by his interactions with Pastor Bob, where he finds himself uninterested by and even challenging his teachings. I guess it makes sense considering the amount of crimes against God Tony has committed in this show, but that's besides the point. My favorite material in this episode has got to be Polly's conflict with Nucci and Dottie, and him acting like Nucci is some sort of evil scumbag, despite the fact that she took care of him and loved him like a son his entire life. Like, okay, to be fair to Polly, if I'd gone through 50 or 60 years of my life and my aunt told me on her deathbed that she was my mother and that my mother was my aunt, that would probably fuck with me for a long time. But Polly's acting like she left him hungry and homeless his entire life. And we know for a fact that Nucci had to have been treating him well, because not only was he paying for her to live in a pretty nice nursing home, but he also killed that old lady last season, resulting from complications from her being a dick to Nucci. And also bread rolls. That moment when Polly started crying after watching Jason's mother try and keep him from harm was actually pretty moving, even though Polly was probably thinking, oh, why didn't Nucci treat me this way? Instead of feeling guilty for treating Nucci like shit despite the good she did raising him. The stuff with Bobby and one of Deluxe's associates was also pretty decent, but nothing crazy. Man, if I had a nickel for every time a below average episode of The Sopranos featured a rap artist as a character in the plot, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. I thought the religious angle in this episode was really interesting, both with Pastor Bob, along with Dottie and Nucci covering up Dottie's birth due to her affiliation as a nun. And also E major guy.
E major.
E major. The rest of the episode is fine enough, but nothing to really write home about other than the aforementioned material I just discussed. Overall, I'm feeling a low beats here for this episode. Season 6, Episode 5. Mr. and Mrs. John's Sacrimoni Request. Oh! Who lives in New Jersey and works for the mob?
Tony Soprano.
Who's petulant, angry, and also hates his mom?
Tony Soprano.
Rusty complains to his wife that Johnny's daughter is about to get married soon. Wait, a time card transition? In My Sopranos? Johnny goes to court and is given special permission by the judge to attend his daughter's wedding, albeit under very strict conditions. We're introduced to muscular bald guy Perry Annunziata, a recent addition to the Soprano crew / new bodyguard of Tony's. Some asshole cuts them off as Perry pulls up next to them and nearly gets into a fight, with Tony stopping him at the last second as Perry soon apologizes, saying that he often forgets to count to 10 before situations like this, which Tony finds relatable since he also literally never does that. Tony finally meets with Melfi again and really kicks off the meeting with a bang.
So let me ask you right off. Is there any chance of a mercy fuck?
Melfi asks if Tony's had any night terrors since the incident, as Tony's like, what's the doom and gloom about? I only got shot by my uncle, lighten up. But Melfi says that they still have a lot to talk about, as Tony repeats his every day is a gift line from earlier. And they talk about AJ, with Tony complaining that he flunked out of college, as Melfi reminds him that he dropped out of college after a semester and a half, calling back to when he admitted this back in the pilot episode. Man, I refer back to this episode a lot, don't I? Tony makes fun of AJ for his lame job at Blockbusters. Melfi points out that there are worse ways to make a living, claiming that AJ might be learning from Tony's mistakes by not engaging in the typical lifestyle of the mafia, what with the easy access to guns and solving disputes by using said guns. Paulie and Chris play an intense game of Go Fish as Tony finally arrives back at the Bing. He discusses his surgery with the table and complains that he lost muscle mass, not fat, wishing that something better could have come out of that situation, as Junior is sent to a prison psychiatric facility while he stares at Tic Tacs. Johnny Sack blows as Johnny Stack of the family while planning the wedding, apologizing and saying that they'll get through the situation together. And the Soprano crew has fun playing cards before the fun mood takes a downswing thanks to Phil making an appearance, who tells Tony outside the store that Johnny wants Rusty murdered, saying that Johnny's worried that he might find another person like Little Carmine that uses a puppet to secretly run the family through, and says that he wants Tony or one of his guys to do the hit so that eyes won't be drawn to the New York crew. Tony rejects this request, saying that he's tired of doing Johnny's bidding before breathing heavily into his car. Carm takes Tony's place in the grabbing of the morning paper, featuring an oh-so-clever headline regarding Junior that Carm throws in the trash. Tony and Carm prepare gifts for Allegra Sacrimoni's wedding as Tony speculates when Meadows getting married. And while Meadows says that they're putting a lot of pressure on her, Tony says that he's only antsy due to his near-death experience and that the thought of holding Meadows' kids in his lap has become very important to him, which Meadow doesn't reply to. The wedding day finally arrives as Johnny is escorted by the police inside, and everyone complains about the heightened security as Phil mentions that Johnny was forced to pay for it out of pocket. Tony gets metal detected and is forced to take his shoes off, which, given his current condition, doesn't end well as he's caught before he falls to the ground. Allegra and her husband take their vows. We get this amazing exchange between Chris and Polly.
Allegra? Ain't that a cold medicine?
Means happiness in Italian.
The fuck's that got to do with cold medicine?
We witness the couples in the crowd engage in hot and steamy hand-holding, except for Vito, whose hand is noticeably limp. Tony meets Johnny at the after party and finds out that the wedding is costing the family a whopping $425 grand. And Johnny tries to discuss the Rusty hit with Tony before Tony looks at Johnny's supervisors behind him and is like, haha, maybe not now. They move over to a table and subtly discuss the issue there, so it looks like they're talking with the old folks, with Johnny saying that Rusty's a pussy for not stepping up to bat himself and calling him a cancer. And Tony says that he should use one of his own doctors to fix said cancer, as Johnny mentions that Rusty could have stepped up as boss when Carmine Sr. died, but didn't. He says that his position as boss isn't solidified yet, and that making a move against Rusty in his current predicament is too risky, asking Tony to do this favor for him, as Tony finally bends the knee and agrees to do so, with Johnny saying that he won't forget this. The bride and the groom dance with each other as the MC invites all the other couples onto the dance floor, with even Tony joining the dance despite his condition, and Vito and his wife dance completely passionlessly while Junior gets checked into the psychiatric facility, with Junior claiming to his lawyer that he'd never shoot his own nephew. He sadly begs his lawyer for him to go home, as his lawyer tells him that's not possible and they get some rest for the time being. And Johnny dances with Allegra as Tony looks at Meadow, calling back to their conversation earlier this episode. Tony talks to Chris about the Rusty hit and says that they should bring someone over from Naples to do the job, with Chris calling it a pussy-ass maneuver and saying that it's like The Godfather and how you can't refuse a man's request on his daughter's wedding day, to which Tony corrects him and says that it's the other way around. Tony says they need to keep Johnny satisfied for the time being since Phil is still pissed about Billy, and Vito gets bored and leaves the wedding early with his family. Allegra and Eric feed cake to each other as the marshals inform Johnny that he needs to wrap up his time at the wedding soon due to his 6-hour time limit, and the bride and groom leave for their honeymoon as everyone celebrates outside. Everything seems like a wonderful fairy tale ending until the marshals pull up in front of Allegra's ride and force Johnny into the car, and Johnny bursts into tears as he's dragged away while Ginny suddenly faints onto the ground. Alright, put yourself in Johnny's shoes for a second. Imagine you're facing like 47 RICO predicates, murder charges, shit like that, and you just attended your daughter's wedding, which is already making you pretty emotional. Then just as things end, the marshals have to pull up and make a scene and end the wedding on the sourest of sour notes. Now, me personally, I don't blame Johnny even remotely for bowling like that, and I'm sure you the folks at home watching don't either. Do you know who would, though?
I'll tell you one thing, and I'm not ashamed to say it. My estimation of John Sacrimoni as a man just fucking plummeted.
Tony comes to Johnny's defense and says it was a long day, as Phil speculates that, after crying one time for 5 seconds, who knows what information Johnny will give to the cops. And Marie watches a romantical movie on television as Vito says he needs to make collections and coldly tells Marie to go to bed. And Carm tells Tony in bed how lucky they've been lately as Johnny gets ready for bed himself in prison. The show cuts to a gay nightclub as 2 Lupertazzi family associates make collections, and we watch this guy dance as the show pans over and, oh my god! Wait, we know this already.
Vito?
Oh my god! Vito nervously demands the wise guys not to say anything about his secret as Sal tells Vito to say hi to his wife. And Vito arrives back at his place to get himself a gun before heading to a motel for the night. And he gives Silvio a call, checking in to make sure that the Vito is gay rumors haven't spread yet. Vito breathes a sigh of relief and stares at the gun that he got himself. And Tony complains to Melfi about the incident with him nearly passing out at the wedding, saying that he's been noticing people looking at him weirdly and questioning his judgment ever since he got out of the hospital. And Melfi advises him to act as if he doesn't give a shit what people think. The Soprano crew fucks around as Tony arrives at Satriale's with Perry, and he looks at Bobby playing basketball along with Paulie's muscular arm, insecure about how his underlings perceive him and whether or not they think he's weak. Tony asks Silvio where Vito is, as Silvio knows that Vito gave him a call just the other night. And Tony angrily looks around at his peers having a good time, staring at Perry's muscles in particular while adjusting a ring on his finger. He very suddenly starts conflict with Perry and claims that he slammed the refrigerator door, provoking Perry and immediately escalating things by punching him in the face. The two start fighting with each other as Tony eventually wins the battle, with the guys helping Perry off the floor while Tony pukes his guts out in the bathroom. He washes himself by the sink and smiles at himself in the mirror before puking his guts out some more. And the show cuts to black, ending the episode. I thought this one was pretty good. Not a whole lot to say about it, but I enjoyed it more than the previous episode. I thought the material with Allegra's wedding was surprisingly entertaining on rewatch, but the best part of the episode has to go to Vito's cover being blown to the nightclub. Tony was such a fucking baby in the last scene in this episode, completely ignoring Melfi's advice and instead starting conflict with Perry for the sole purpose of trying to command respect after falling over at the wedding. I thought every day was a gift. Why are you using those gifts to punch people? He claims that people in his crew are starting to question his judgment, but the only person who really does that in this episode is Chris, and Chris is fucking stupid. Anyways, this episode is getting a low A tier. Season 6, Episode 6. Live Free or Die. As if the Breaking Bad Sopranos connections couldn't get obvious enough, both shows contain an episode named after the state motto of New Hampshire due to one of the characters staying out in New Hampshire to cover up a secret. Clearly plagiarized, revoke all Vince Gilligan's Emmys.
Got yourself a gun. Got yourself a gun.
Tony tries relaxing in the pool until he hears rattling coming from the top of the AC, which can be solved by repositioning the top so that it doesn't rattle. Or you can just throw it, yeah, that'll work. Tony looks at a yachting magazine for a Stugatz 3 as his method shockingly doesn't work and the AC goes back to rattling. And Vito's Gumar Jill complains that they haven't played Battleship in over a year, as Vito says it's because of his blood sugar and not because he likes men. Tony informs Chris of Rusty's upcoming murder and that the two assailants in the murder will call him when they arrive, saying to hook them up with a third party that'll give them some weaponry before Tony apologizes to Perry for his outburst last episode, giving him some money as Chris later leaves an AA meeting early to smoke some cigarettes since nicotine is an addictive substance. A guy at the meeting named Kevin Nucci meets him outside and informs him that his cousin Sal recently spotted Vito busting it down freaky style at a gay nightclub, and Chris hurries to the bang to tell everybody the news. Paulie claims this rumor to be slander and implies that being gay is somehow worse than cheating on your wife, as he says that Vito is hurting both his wife and his Gumar by doing this, and Tony decides to take the meeting in the back.
Oh, let's take this in the back.
Yeah, that's what Vito did.
You can go.
Chris lies and says that he called Vito being gay a long time ago, as Tony tells everyone to calm down and not to rush to judgment, and attempts to get Vito on the phone as Silvio recalls Vito calling him in the middle of the night, and the call to Vito predictably goes straight to voicemail. Or I guess gay to voicemail. Forget it, I'm sorry. Most of the guys act like Vito just committed a crime against humanity as Tony tells them to chill out, while Silvio pitches the idea of getting in contact with Vito's Gumar to find out where he is. And we're gifted with maybe one of the funniest exchanges in the entire show.
Think about it though, Tony. So weight loss. AIDS?
Nobody's got AIDS. I don't want to hear that word here again.
Meadow talks about a Muslim family she met volunteering at the Law Center and how the government is discriminating against them. Though most of the family predictably makes fun of Meadow for caring, as Meadow predictably criticizes them for this.
9/11, 9/11. Bush is using it as an excuse to erode our constitutional protections, and you're falling for it.
I voted for him.
Carm, that is just not a good defense at all. While Carm's response is lackluster, Tony makes up for this by giving us this really fucking funny line.
You want to chill out about some of this.
Tony asks Chris if it's possible that Ahmed and Muhammad are part of Al-Qaeda, as Chris tells Tony that the chances of that being the case are very unlikely, saying that they're only potential murderers, which Tony is fine with. Vito gets confronted by Benny Fazio and company and says that Tony's been looking for him, and Vito's like, okay, I'll be right there, and then goes, psych, just kidding, and fools around out of there, leaving Benny and the guys in the dust. Chris meets with his weapons guy and tells him to give the two guys from Naples some gats, and the guy asks about the Vito being gay rumor, which Chris claims is false, saying that he was only spotted with his Gumar. Vito prepares his escape out of New Jersey and shoves his spare cash in a duffel bag along with an old picture of him and his wife, and he kisses both of his kids goodnight before leaving. It rains cats and dogs while Vito fools around off, eating ribs covered in barbecue, which personally takes my vote for the absolute worst possible food that you can eat while driving. You constantly gotta clean your fingers off the entire time, because if you don't, your steering wheel is just gonna be coated in barbecue sauce. Barbecue sauce is such a horrible thing to have to clean too, because that smell just doesn't go away. Vito's heart sinks into his stomach as his phone rings with a call from Phil, prompting Vito to toss his phone out the window as the phone rings out for mercy. Vito hits a literal road bump as a tree branch gets stuck in his tire, and he abandons his car and walks in the pouring rain with his belongings. He finds himself in New Hampshire, checks himself into a bed and breakfast, deciding to pay it in cash.
I'll pay cash.
Vito collapses on his bed while Carm stares at the unfinished spec house, and finds out that all of the supplies in the shed have been taken, prompting her to go to her father's house to complain about it. She accuses her father of taking everything and calls him a vulture, while her father reminds her that she never straightened the issues with the permits out, and Carm angrily storms away while a bunch of ducks on the roof follow suit, tying back to ducks representing family in the Sopranos universe. Vito tries finding the numbers of his cousins in New Hampshire, but has no luck doing so, leaving him on his lonesome as he heads to a local diner and talks with his guy behind the counter, who recommends Vito to try some Johnny Cakes, with Vito and the man exchanging some suspicious glances between each other. Back in New Jersey, Marie tells Silvio that Vito's said to be back from Vegas soon, as Silvio asks how things have been going between the two, and Marie claims that they've had their ups and downs, as Silvio tries getting into their battleship life while Marie turns this conversation topic down. Silvio tells Marie to forget about it and walks out of the house, telling Tony that Marie very likely isn't getting laid, as Tony tries giving Vito a call, with Tony's anger issues causing the construction worker to toss Vito's phone underneath the compactor. The mob wives set up a silent auction with Carm as Angie walks in and puts down $2,000 worth of bodywork and paint for the auction, which surprises Carm. And they discuss Marie and Vito's marital issues before Angie gets preoccupied with work and asks to leave dinner early. Tony discusses with Melfi the recent revelation of Vito secretly being gay, with Tony claiming that he had a hunch he was gay the whole time, despite the fact that he criticized Chris earlier for thinking the same thing. Tony says losing Vito would be a shame since he's one of his best guys, and that he also gave Carm some cash while he was hospitalized. And Melfi says it's interesting that cash is the issue since he's already a millionaire, as Tony implies that there's a bigger issue at hand here.
You tell me, what is the issue?
He's a
And?
Now what am I supposed to do?
Tony claims that gay people have cooties and smell weird, before Melfi points out that a lot of Tony's thoughts on gay people contain a lot of ambivalence, implying that Tony's putting up a front on how he actually feels about the issue, as Tony admits that he doesn't really care what happens behind closed doors, saying that he's a strict Catholic despite the fact that he kills people for money. Tony says that it sucks that certain people in his business are not going to want to work with Vito after this, and that this is going to be a huge pain in the ass for Tony money-wise, and admits to Melfi that, deep down, he actually doesn't really give a shit regarding how people lean sexually. He says that he doesn't blame men who play Battleship with other men in prison, considering the fact that some people are in there for years and years, asking who gives a shit, and saying that Vito should be given a second chance by the crew, considering the fact that he too was given a second chance at life after getting shot. You know, I gotta say, despite my criticisms of Tony, this is not a terrible take to have. Granted, it's not a perfect viewpoint, but considering how hot-headed and derogatory most of the crew's acting toward the issue, this is actually a pretty progressive take to have by comparison. Nice one, Tony. I wonder what his thoughts on black people are. Carm asks Tony to tell the building contractor to cut her some slack on the spec house, and she rubs some vitamin E stuff on Tony's belly scar, while Tony admits to Carm that she was right about Junior all along, saying that he should have cut him out of his life years earlier. He tells Carm what Melfi told him earlier this season, and how he only stood by Junior's side because he wanted to subconsciously prove to his mother that he was a good guy. And the next morning, Carm and Rosalie talk about the Vito gay rumors, as Meadow reveals that Finn saw him going down on the security guard back in season 5, which causes Carm and Rosalie to freak out, while Tony walks downstairs performing the most dubbed-in singing I've ever seen in my life.
Sitting on the park bench.
Finn is later brought into Satriel's and begins to spill the beans on his encounter with Vito. And Vito, meanwhile, takes a walk around New Hampshire, taking in the sights and grading the locals as he contemplates how to get out of this pickle. Finn tells the crew the story confirming Vito's sexuality and reveals that Vito was the one who was sucking off the security guard, not the other way around. What shocks the crew is they verify that Vito was catching, not pitching. Tony sends Finn off and gives Finn the incredible offer to get a sandwich and a soda from Satriel's, and any kind he likes too. And the crew discusses what they're gonna do now, with Paulie expressing his betrayal and claiming that he feels like he's been stabbed in the heart, as if Vito played Battleship with men with the sole intent of pissing off Paulie. Tony says they need to think about this before taking any action, as Paulie asks what there is to think about, and Tony asks if Paulie's gonna take care of Vito's kids when he's gone and tells everyone to chill out. And Chris jokes about Vito greasing the union at the construction site, as nobody except Patsy laughs. Phil tells Marie that Vito was confirmed to have given head to a construction worker and that they can't be in denial about Vito's actions, and asks Marie if she knows where Vito went, as Carm heads to Angie's auto body shop, accidentally interrupting a meeting between Angie, Benny, and Patsy, with Carm wondering what the fuck's going on. Rosalie later tells Carm that Angie's getting into the mob business and that she's putting money on the street, which leaves Carm with mixed feelings. Tony puts Carlo in charge of construction while Vito's out, which makes Carlo very pleased. And he informs Tony that Vito has completely lost the respect of all of his underlings, himself included. Tony says that it's not their call who leads them and comes to Vito's defense, saying that he was easily one of his best earners, calling him a come-from-behind kind of guy, which... sure. Carlos says that certain people want Vito to be whacked, as Tony compares them to a bunch of drama-loving schoolgirls, but tells Carlo that he's gonna do great things with the construction site before he takes off. Tony and Silvio sit in silence for a moment as Tony asks Silvio what's the matter, and Silvio warns Tony that, should Vito actually come back and start working for them again, it's probably gonna cost a lot of money out of Tony's pocket, as his crew members might start losing respect for Tony and withholding earnings from him. But Tony tells him to shut up so he can read. Metal starts an internship for a professional law center, while Tony admits to Carm that he forgot to talk to the building inspector again, and Metal rants to Finn about how the police were discriminating against Johnny Sack, saying they dragged him away at the wedding to embarrass him, as Finn points out that he is indicted on a murder charge. Finn talks about him ratting out Vito to the guys at the pork store and asks Metal what's gonna happen to Vito for being gay, saying that he doesn't want to hear any excuses about how, oh, back in the olden days they used to fight corruption like last season, and that whatever happens to Vito won't be real justice, pointing out her hypocrisy about the government treating Tony and his crew unfairly as Metal angrily leaves the room. Vito enters an antique shop and notices the "Live Free or Die" motto on the New Hampshire license plate, paralleling Vito's current situation and how living in New Hampshire will set him free, while going back to the mob life in New Jersey will no doubt lead to a certain demise. And the show fades to black, ending the episode. I really enjoyed this episode. The storyline with Vito's secret finally being outed to the mafia world is another example of social commentary actually working in the Sopranos' favor, as we witness the ripple effects of this incident and how our cast of characters handle the news. According to Joseph Ganiscoli, he was the one who actually pitched the idea of Vito being gay, as he was inspired by the book Murder Machine, more specifically the story of real-life mafia member Vito Arena, who, years after his murder in the 90s, was revealed to have been dating a man named Joey Lee who was several years younger than him. Ganiscoli says that pitching the idea to the writing team was tricky, since he didn't want to seem like a douchebag trying to hog the limelight, and he allegedly offhandedly pitched the idea to writer Robin Green during filming of season 4. Now, there are rumors that Joe Ganascoli isn't exactly liked by all of the cast members, and that certain actors might have been pissed that Vito was taking up a lot of the runtime this season, but I'm not gonna get into any of that because it's a lot of he said, she said, and I think weighing into the discourse isn't gonna do anybody any good. Still, it's interesting enough to warrant a brief mention. It only makes sense that a show about a bunch of old people getting into petty drama with each other also might have had some old people getting into petty drama with each other behind the scenes. I personally enjoy Vito's whole New Hampshire arc this season and the fallout that arises from it, and I'll be delving more into it once the time comes. There were also so many great bits of dialogue in this episode, from Paulie claiming that he felt personally betrayed by Vito playing Battleship with men, to Bobby saying that Vito can't be a part of their social club, to this absolutely insane slip of the tongue by Tony.
This guy that got outed, look, the guys that work for me are asking for head. His head. What the fuck?
I also love the scene where Finn finally details to the crew the scene he witnessed back in season 5. It's rare that the show gives us a character as normal and as morally sound as Finn, and it's hard not to relate to his discomfort and awkwardness as he admits what he saw to the Sopranos social club. Anyways, overall, this was a great episode. Can't lie, I'm feeling a light S tier on this one. Season 6, Episode 7. Luxury Lounge. The weapons guy delivers the guns to the two guys from Naples and gives them Rusty's address, and the guys celebrate the presence of new blood in the family before Phil starts ranting about Vito in a sophisticated manner.
It's an honor to be joined by men, and not ass like married my cousin. He should fucking die.
They discuss Artie being off his game recently and complain to Artie about the food not being out yet before the food bees out from the kitchen. Yeah, that works. And Carlo talks about his detective friend Tommy potentially helping with a Vito search before Chris tells Tony that he's gonna need some time off to attend business in California, saying that he's got a meeting with actor Ben Kingsley lined up and that he's gonna try and get him attached to the Cleaver project, which Tony approves of. The two Naples guys successfully pull the hit on Rusty as they block him from exiting the driveway and kill both him and his bodyguard. And we watch Artie interrupt an active conversation to talk about how he cooks food in the kitchen or some shit. He talks to Chris, his AA guy, and Benny Fazio about new host Martina, who recently moved from Albania to America after her entire family got murdered at home. She mentions to the guys that numbers at Vesuvio aren't doing too hot right now as Chris's AA guy gives Ahmed and Muhammad stolen credit card information. And we're taken to Da Giovanni, the chum bucket to Vesuvio's Krusty Krab, where Karn praises the food and calls Artie's food tired and lame and boring, while Tony says that he feels like a traitor. We find out why they're here as Tony and Silvio congratulate Phil on his grandson's confirmation, and Tony tries asking Phil to eat at Vesuvio more often as Phil changes the subject to Johnny being happy about Rusty's murder, with Tony pretending like he has no idea what he's talking about. The customers at Giovanni's praise the cooks for the food, while the only action going on in Artie's restaurant is the action between Benny and Martina, which Artie interrupts as he drags Martina away from him and tells her that she's gonna have to file for a green card herself. Artie later goes to the Bing and tries playing this weird boo-hoo poor me game as Tony sits next to him, lamenting that Tony objectively gets more pussy than him as Tony criticizes him for being in a passive-aggressive mood. Artie confronts Tony for eating at his competitors as Tony tells him it was only for Phil's grandson's confirmation, saying that it was a business obligation as Artie says that Tony's last business obligation ended with his restaurant in flames, and Artie angrily leaves the Bing as Tony tries preventing him from going, to no avail. Artie talks to Charmaine later that night about how things suck with the restaurant right now as Charmaine mentions that Artie was too busy talking with one of the customers to talk with his meat guy, and uses this opportunity to tell Artie that he really needs to stop chatting with a guest altogether, which upsets Artie as he insists that his interactions are crucial to the Vesuvio experience. Carmine Jr. and Chris make it to California while Artie takes his sweet time making his guests uncomfortable, and he notices Martina and Benny still hitting it off, which he once again interrupts. Benny asks why the fuck he keeps interrupting and mentions that Martina thinks that Artie's doing this just to upset her, and Artie continues being bitchy and says that Benny should hire Martina if they're gonna keep talking all the time, while Benny says that he knows how to treat people better than Artie, which almost causes Artie to throw a fit before Charmaine intercepts Artie and drags him back to the kitchen. She tells him to stop being such a dick to Benny and Martina as Artie yells that he's a married man as if he wasn't just at a strip club earlier. And Chris ignores everything he learned from AA and plays in the snow with this prostitute. Artie meets Tony of Vesuvio later and tells him that profits for the restaurant are down a staggering 40%. And Tony tries pitching the idea of 2-for-1 coupons as Artie says that he doesn't want his fine dining establishment to be overtaken by gimmicks, and criticizes Tony for not paying his tab of the restaurant before storming away. Chris's AA guy heads to the hotel owned by the Jewish guys and gives some money in exchange for a credit card reader. And a couple of representatives from American Express inform Artie that credit card fraud has been taking place at Vesuvio and that, until further notice, they will not be allowing their cards to be used at Vesuvio, further tanking Artie's revenues and nearly shits a biscuit before Charmaine tells him to chill out. Ben Kingsley, who plays the role of Hollywood actor Ben Kingsley in this episode, meets with Carmine Jr. and Chris with less than limited time to discuss his potential potential role as the main antagonist of Cleaver, with Ben Kingsley mentioning that him choosing a role is script dependent, as Chris mentions that the movie's gonna be written by JT Dolan, known for working on stuff like Nash Bridges and Law & Order SUV.
Law and Order the SUV.
Their meeting gets interrupted as Ben Kingsley greets fellow actress Lauren Bacall, saying that the two should catch up before telling Chris and Carmine Jr. that he's supposed to be at the luxury lounge soon. And Carmine Jr. literally runs after Ben while Chris calls his sponsor while he plays GTA 6 and tells him to get on a plane to Cali since the meeting with Ben is going just spectacularly. Carmine continues trying to get Ben Kingsley in the movie while he tours around the luxury lounge, with Chris in particular absolutely flabbergasted by the sheer variety of free shit there is to obtain. Sir Ben Kingsley tells Carmine and Chris that he'll talk with them again later since he's got a meeting to attend before giving Chris a free pair of sunglasses. Another amazing transition from The Sopranos. Bravo, Chase. Tony gives Benny some money to pay off his tab of Vesuvio, while Artie soils his chances of Vesuvio making a comeback further by confronting his employees and demanding to know which one of them was responsible for the credit card fraud, playing the role of the level-headed guy before immediately letting his anger boil over and calling everyone a piece of shit and a backstabber. Martina calls Benny suspiciously worried about the American Express guys coming into the restaurant as Benny insists that things will be fine, and Benny goes back to eating at the Chum Bucket while Artie decides to cancel Looney Tunes. Things go south for Christopher as he drunk dials Ben Kingsley, not about the movie, but rather about the luxury lounge and whether or not he can hook him up. But Ben Kingsley says that's a no-go, as Chris says that they'll meet in New York soon. Chris's AA sponsor arrives at the perfect time as he notices Chris carrying around a bottle of champagne, and one of Artie's employees named Sandy informs Artie that Martina was flexing a pair of $600 shoes the other day, which silently enrages Artie as he quietly tells Sandy to leave. He confronts Martina about it later that day as Martina folds under quite literally no pressure, saying that she did this because of how he'd been treating her recently and claiming that he started picking on her due to him being jealous that Benny's playing Battleship with her and not Artie. And Artie fires her $600 shoe having ass before heading over to Benny's house for further punishment. Unlike last time with the French loan guy, this confrontation actually goes fairly well for Artie, as Benny claims that Martina got greedy before getting the piss beaten out of him by Artie. Chris runs into Ben Kingsley in the elevator with his sponsor, asking for another trip to the luxury lounge as Ben Kingsley says it's out of his control, and asks Chris's AA sponsor about his nickname, Murmur, which Murmur says stems from a heart murmur he had as a kid. Ben Kingsley tells Chris that he gives most of the stuff he receives away and that, during award shows, presenters earn around $30,000 in merchandise from these luxury lounges, which reminds Chris of the fact that Lauren Bacall will be presenting for an award show here soon. Artie and Charmaine ride the Stugatz 2 with Carm and Tony as Tony confronts Artie about his issue with Benny, claiming that he never would have let the scam go down at Vesuvio if he'd known, as Artie accuses him of not being as innocent as he claims to be. He tells Tony that the hit from the American Express revenue is forcing him to actually go through with creating 2-for-1 deals at Vesuvio, lamenting the fact that his father used to tell him that things would work out eventually, despite things not working out nor eventually. Chris consumes a breakfast fit for a Kingsley as Carmine Jr. informs Chris that Ben Kingsley passed on the Cleaver role, prompting Chris to destroy his free pair of sunglasses. And Benny demands Tony for Artie's head before Tony congratulates Benny on his son, telling criminal mastermind Benny Fazio that whatever's going down between him and Artie needs to be dropped. He says that Benny's parents' anniversary will take place at Vesuvio instead of Giovanni, and that Artie will give Benny a rate and an apology. And Lauren Bacall gets the tar knocked out of her as 30 grand worth of merch gets jacked by a masked man. 2 First Nights goes down at Vesuvio as a cascade of customers enter the place, including Benny and his folks. And Artie decides to push his luck just ever so slightly as he asks Benny in front of his wife if he'd like a martina, or a martini from Albania. A comment that absolutely enrages Benny as he storms to the back of the kitchen and allows Artie to get lost in the sauce. Ow, that really hurts, Benny! Please don't do that ever again! Murmur and Chris get on a plane back to New Jersey and discover a tabloid article about Lauren's robbing from earlier, which the two laugh about as none other than Ben Kingsley arrives on the same plane with them, and Chris stares at him from behind the same way a baby stares at you in public. Artie tells Tony that things have been downhill for Vesuvio ever since Benny left his mark, saying that regulars are nervous about their credit cards getting stolen and that the staff is pissed about Martina's firing. And Tony notices Artie reusing his earlier high chair comment on a random couple in the restaurant and follows him in the back, recommending him the number of a psychiatrist and saying that he goes about in pity for himself. He tells Artie that he keeps blaming everyone else for the problems with his restaurant instead of doing some self-reflection on how he runs his business, saying that while he's very grateful for Artie's restaurant, reflecting on the season 1 finale when Artie cooked the family food during the thunderstorm, Artie still needs to adapt to the current landscape, and also gives Artie a brutal truth bomb and that nobody wants to be interrupted while eating to hear Artie and his dumb jokes and anecdotes, a piece of advice that stops Artie right in his tracks. Chris gives Tony a taste of Lauren Bacall's merch basket as Tony looks unimpressed at said taste, and talks about the issue with Benny and Artie, passive-aggressively telling Chris that things might not have gotten out of hand if he were in New Jersey watching over his crew. And Chris says that Tony approved him to go and once again plays the "oh, I let Adriana die so now I can do anything I want" card, which Tony calls him out for. In what is easily the best scene of the episode, Charmaine tells Artie that they got one more couple to deal with for the night, saying that they had issues fooling around on their way to the city, paralleling the aforementioned scene back in the season 1 finale, when Tony and the family also stopped to eat there due to car troubles. Artie says that they're eating what he's cooking them and quietly prepares an old rabbit recipe that his father made many years ago, using the same rabbit he shot earlier as the main ingredient. He reads the recipe out of an old notebook written by his father as he prepares the dish, with some gentle Italian music playing in the background as the two guys from Naples take a plane ride back, flexing some expensive items they got while they were there while David Chase listens in the background, and the show fades to black, ending the episode. Now, if I haven't made it obvious yet in these videos, I am a big Artie Bucco fan. He's up there as one of my favorite characters in the show, thanks to the great writing along with a terrific performance by John Ventimiglia. I've talked already about how much I love his misadventures throughout the show and his numerous attempts to seem cooler than he actually is, and I believe that Luxury Lounge serves as a fantastic send-off to his character. I say this like he's not going to be in the show from now on, but no, he's still in the show. He just doesn't get into any more major conflict from this point forward, and I believe the last scene of this episode explains why this is. Luxury Lounge contains what is easily one of the most chaotic Artie plots in all of The Sopranos, with mafia battles, dramatic confrontations, and Artie making everyone uncomfortable for most of it. This episode makes it very clear to Artie that he's lost the plot, but unlike someone like Tony, whose endless streams of revenue permit him to remain stagnant and never improve as a person, Artie isn't so lucky, as his questionable business and life decisions put his restaurant in jeopardy, forcing him to make some tough decisions, financially and personally. The conflict in this episode, along with some frank conversations with Charmaine and especially Tony, force Artie to do some self-reflecting and get both his life as well as his restaurant back on track. And this changing character is represented excellently with the final scene in this episode, where Artie rediscovers his love for cooking as he quietly looks through his father's recipe and cooks by himself in the kitchen. He realizes that he doesn't need to be some charismatic, entertaining figure, nor does he need to be some tough-as-nails mafia associate. All he needed to do was remind himself of what he truly loves doing and rediscover his passion, which is demonstrated perfectly with the final scene in this episode. I think, in one way or another, we all have a piece of Artie inside of us. We all want to be something more than we are deep down, but what Artie's story in this episode shows us is that we shouldn't let those thoughts distract us from what really matters to us. In a weird way, this might just be one of the happiest endings that The Sopranos has ever offered to its viewers, as for once, someone finally does some self-reflection and checks themselves out of the game before they find themselves in too deep to escape. Granted, it took Artie like 3 tries to get to this point, but hey, better late than never. Artie's arc even parallels Chris's B-plot in this episode, as his obsession with the luxury lounge and the rich assortment of goods distracts him from the networking he could be accomplishing in California. Instead, the only networking that he accomplishes is adding yet another victim of the mafia to his Rolodex, contrasting Artie deciding not to add to his rap sheet and stay out of the game. Anyways, overall, I thought this episode was pretty good. Artie's material ends up taking up most of the runtime, which, if you can't tell already, is something that I am perfectly fine with, especially considering the fact that his material is far and away the best aspect of this episode. I thought Chris's subplot with him trying to get in contact with Ben Kingsley along with him getting obsessed with the luxury lounge was mildly entertaining, but nothing crazy. I'm feeling an A tier for Artie. Season 6, Episode 8, Johnny Cakes.
Woke up this morning, got some Johnny Cakes.
Vito looks at pictures of buff men and hears a fire truck out his window. And Carm talks to Tony about how blessed they are that they can play Battleship again after that whole mess from earlier. And AJ ruins the atmosphere by playing the drums. As it turns out, however, it wasn't AJ playing the drums, but rather some musicians who want to buy the drums off AJ. With Tony and Carm saying that those drums were a gift, as AJ says that he needs money since his blockbuster gig isn't paying him big. Vito follows the fire truck and watches the guy who gave Vito Johnny Cakes at the diner earlier save a child from a burning building, who Vito stares at in amazement and wonder and certain other emotions. Tony and AJ drink some beer while fishing on the Stugats too, as AJ asks what they're gonna do about Junior, with Tony saying that they should just not bother with him and let him rot in prison. And Patsy makes some collections before running into some trouble at the coffee shop, with the manager essentially telling them that robbing the place or assaulting the employees really isn't going to affect the business much in the long run, since the company runs thousands of other stores around the country, with Patsy lamenting that it's over for the little guy. You got that right, Patsy. They really ought to change things so that you guys can kill people more easily. Vito pretends to be a writer named Vince. Okay, the Breaking Bad connections are just getting ridiculous, as he explores around New Hampshire while Chris and Tony stare at some girls' asses. And Chris admits that he can't really kill Vito if the time comes, due to the feds being more wary of his actions ever since he had Adriana shot in the back of the head. Tony talks about how his little soprano wasn't working for a little bit after the shooting, but that it's now working at full force, which is some unfortunate timing, as a tall, dark-haired lady named Juliana Skiff asks Tony for a minute of his time. She says that she represents Jamba Juice and that they want to purchase a chicken shop that Tony owns to turn it into a Jamba Juice, offering over 300 grand for it, as Tony says that the store produces high-quality eggs and that the neighborhood would sorely miss it. Tony talks about his family roots in New Jersey, as Juliana talks about how she left home at 17 due to her family wanting her to take up up a job as a caterer that she didn't particularly enjoy. Juliana asks Tony if he's interested in her offers. Tony says that he's very interested. Wink, 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 wink. But says he wants a bigger offer for the chicken shop. Vito visits the diner once again and talks to the guy who saved the child from the burning building earlier, Jim. And talks about how he's having difficulties writing a book as an old man eating behind him tries fact-checking Vince on the spot while Vito gets annoyed. He accidentally gets a factoid wrong as Jim corrects him. And he says that Vince might be working too hard as he gently puts his hand on top of Vito's, which makes Vito get a boner and explode before Jim's kid walks into the diner to get her science project. Tony takes a walk down the neighborhood and runs into a foul-mouthed Mrs. Conti.
Hey, Andy! Oh, I need your help.
What?
Those fucking horse, they play that music so loud.
Now that's not nice. And those are Puerto Ricans, Mrs. Conti.
This interaction is very funny to me.
I fucking hate those. I wanna get the fucking.
Haha, well that's not nice. Tony heads to the chicken shop and finds out the business of the shop's doing great. And we find out exactly why Blockbuster went out of business as AJ and his coworker buddy Matthew fuck around and say naughty words while a customer and her kid wait around for them to check her out. Tony complains to Melfi about AJ being a lazy ass and says that his dad never would have stood for this if Tony was a lazy ass like that. And Melfi says that Tony could probably relate to AJ's issues when he was his age and says that kids are being raised in a completely different world than the one their parents were, saying that 26 is the new 21 as she later complains to Elliot about how Tony is refusing to engage with her regarding the issues he has with Junior in the shooting. Phil complains to Tony that Vito isn't dead yet and how he personally dishonored him as Tony tells Phil to take a chill Phil, with Phil claiming that this wouldn't even be a conversation if Tony's father was still leading the crew as Tony tells Phil that he's not the boss, so shut up. AJ gets a message from this girl from the club who talks about Tony's shooting and brings up the omerta, mentioned by Melfi and Elliot earlier, which essentially refers to a code of silence taken by members of the mafia in regards to criminal activity. I literally just said this. She says to AJ that Tony surely must be planning to do something to Junior as AJ says that he'll probably have to do something, calling back to his vengeful promise that he made to Tony back in the hospital. And Vito steals a phone from somebody staying in the bed and breakfast to call Marie, who begs Vito to come home as Vito tells her that it's not really that easy. Marie claims that they can find groups that'll cure Vito's gay away as Vito tells Marie of a secret location of 30 grand in cash that Marie can use until Vito comes back. And Juliana tracks down Tony at the Bing, who says that Jamba Juice has upped the offer to $225 per square foot. Tony still declines this offer, however, saying that the chicken property is going to be worth even more than what they're offering in the future and offers Juliana to go to dinner to discuss this deal, admitting that he's very attracted to her and saying that ever since he got shot, he's been wanting to do things that make him happy like cheating on his wife since he doesn't know how much time he has left on this earth. Juliana claims that she's going to exercise self-control for once and declines Tony's offer. And Vito gets invited over to the cool volunteer firefighters table at the bar, where Jim and Vito stare at each other. Jim and Vito later meet in the parking lot as Jim mentions that he's happy that Vince decided to write in New Hampshire, and the two briefly kiss before Vito pushes Jim back, proclaiming that he's totally not gay, bro, and starts fighting Jim. A fight that Jim wins easily. Tony and Carr make out in front of AJ before criticizing him for staying up late up in the club. And AJ says that he needs money for new clothes and that he doesn't want to work for it since that's for fucking lame virgins. AJ claims that he could run a club himself and claims that he goes clubbing to learn and see how things work, so it's basically homework at that point. And requests the two to give him a nightclub to manage as Tony and Carr make fun of him for this. With Tony saying that he can get AJ a job at Beansy's Pizza Parlor instead before AJ claims that Tony and Carr never do anything for him and leaves. Tony later complains to Melfi that AJ sucks and that him and Carr are fucking less often because of AJ's poor behavior, saying that he may or may not be seeking an extracurricular outlet as Melfi gives him a weird look. And the meaning of extracurricular outlet is confirmed as Tony starts projecting by claiming that Melfi's projecting onto him. Tony claims that he'd never actually find another woman to play Battleship with under these circumstances as Melfi asks if Tony partially blames Carm for the way AJ turned out, which Tony half-heartedly declines as Melfi tells Tony that if him and Carm are in agreement that AJ's an asshole, they should do something about it and tell him to stop acting as such, especially considering the fact that he lives in their home rent-free. Tony takes this good advice and throws it out the window as he and Carm later give AJ a bunch of money and essentially go, "This is for important college stuff only, so don't go clubbing with it." And Vito and Jim briefly glance at each other out the diner window later that night. AJ puts the money to good use as we see him snort cocaine in the club bathroom, and he meets friends of Hernan's, who talk to AJ about him investing in a sports drink brand that they're starting up. Though by him, they mean Tony Soprano, which makes AJ realize that he's only being kept at the club because of his father's status, as he asks Carm later that night to wake him up early the next morning for something important. Vito has a talk with other fellow bed and breakfasters as he gets distracted by a motorcycle outside, clearly still thinking about Jim. And Carm discovers AJ sitting on the couch at 4 in the afternoon watching Aqua Teen Hunger Force and criticizes him, saying that she thought he had something important to do. Oh my god, he's gonna kill Carmela. Totally unrelated. We're taken to Junior's stay in prison, where he claims that the staff is throwing out his mail while AJ checks himself in. And Junior happily greets him as idiot AJ just stands there in the most suspicious way possible.
Knife!
It's not my knife.
Well, he's no Luigi, I can tell you that much. Tony manages to pull some strings and gets AJ out of any jail time. And he slams AJ against the car, saying that AJ would be fucked right now if it wasn't for his connections. But AJ proclaims that he didn't want Junior to just get away with it, as Tony says that while AJ's heart was in the right place, you still shouldn't be killing people like that because it's wrong. He says that it's not in AJ's nature to murder someone like that, as AJ calls Tony a hypocrite, saying that Tony's favorite scene in The Godfather is the one where Corleone kills the men who attempted to murder his father.
Jesus Christ, AJ. You make me want to cry. It's a movie. You gotta grow up. You're not a kid anymore.
If there's any scene from The Sopranos that lives in my head rent-free, it's gotta be this one. It's far and away one of Tony's most hypocritical moments, because without context, a father telling his son that a scene from a mafia movie wouldn't actually happen like that in real life and that he needs to grow up seems like a relatively normal thing to happen, but the problem is that this statement kind of loses any luster when you're actually in the mafia. It's like Tony is trying to have his cake and eat it too. It's clear that he doesn't want AJ in the mafia, so he tells AJ that doing mafia-adjacent stuff is wrong, despite the atrocities that Tony has committed and will continue to commit. He tells AJ that he needs to grow up, despite the fact that Tony himself hasn't really grown up either. For God's sake, it's been 4 episodes since he got out of the hospital, and only like 9 episodes since he and Karm finally re-established a healthy relationship, and he's already trying to get into some random lady's pants. He's raised AJ in the same way that he would want to be raised, but the moment AJ starts acting out, he dials it back and acts as if AJ was wrong for what he did. It's something that Tony likely would have done if he were AJ's age, and I believe that Tony knows this fact all too well. Matter of fact, he tried killing Livia when he was way past AJ's age, so he's really got no say in this argument. Tony tells AJ not to tell Karm about this, as he gets a call from Juliana the next day, who says that Jamba Juice is up there offered in nearly $500,000 for the chicken place, which Tony says sounds like a deal. He pitches the idea of meeting in her apartment, as Juliana happily agrees, and Vito goes to the diner to semi-apologize to Jim for the fight earlier, admitting that he is indeed gay, bro, as Tony gets dressed for his meeting with Juliana, which Karm helps with, calling Tony her handsome man, which, in a strange turn of events, actually makes Tony feel really guilty, though he obviously keeps this to himself. This moment ties back to his conversation with AJ and how he refuses to grow up, as Tony is confronted by the fact that he too refuses to grow up in certain aspects of his life, like cheating on Karm, which Tony promised again and again not to do, and yet still does, despite it nearly costing his marriage last time. Jim and Vito go on a hot date riding motorcycles together before making out next to a lake, and AJ continues getting offers of the club to have his dad deal with shit, and much like his father, he has a mild panic attack before managing to pull himself back in. Tony walks into Juliana's weird-ass brick apartment, making her statistically the least likely to have her home caved in by a wolf huffing and puffing, and Tony tensely signs the papers while Juliana gives him some interesting looks. Once Tony's finished, the two waste no time getting busy and begin violently making out and undressing each other. But Tony starts to have second thoughts once Juliana starts unbuttoning his shirt, reminded of Carmelo buttoning up his shirt earlier. For once in his life, Tony finally manages to wrangle his cock back in his jeans as he denies any battleship with Juliana and leaves her apartment. And AJ has more of a full-blown panic attack in the club bathroom. And this doctor guy asks AJ if anything like this has happened before, which AJ doesn't answer. Tony takes his anger over not being able to fuck another chick out on Karm and complains about the fact that there's no smoked turkey in the house. And Patsy finds out from the chicken store owner that Tony sold the place, which leave him and his friend befuddled as Patsy asks what's going on with the neighborhood, and the show cuts to black, ending the episode. Another good episode. As I mentioned in my previous videos, I am a big fan of AJ fucking up and annoying everybody episodes, and Johnny Cakes did not disappoint in that department. With that particularly great sequence of AJ attempting to murder Junior, followed by Tony chastising AJ for this move. Going into this episode, I completely forgot about Tony's subplot with Juliana, but after this rewatch, I appreciate the significance of this plot a lot more, as we're shown the extremely rare sight of Tony reflecting on his behavior and not sticking his dick into anything and everything he can. I also enjoyed the plotline with Vito finally getting to third base with Jimbo Johnny Cakes. I know a lot of people aren't huge fans of the Vito New Hampshire storyline this season, mainly considering just how much time it takes up, but I personally find it entertaining and interesting enough to justify it, even if it was probably only made this long to pad the runtime. Overall, I'm feeling a low A tier for this one. Season 6, Episode 9, The Ride.
Woke up this morning, got yourself fucking. Woke up this morning, got yourself fucking.
Chris watches the opening scene from Saw 2 as his new girlfriend Kelly enters the room and reveals that she's pregnant. But instead of throwing a Christoph meltdown over this, Chris actually pitches the idea of the two getting married together, and the two happily hug each other, with Chris mentioning that his last girlfriend couldn't have kids and coping with the fact that he had her killed by calling her a tramp. Paulie and Patsy head to a church to prepare for the annual Feast of St. Altier and the 5-day festival that comes with it, with a new priest of the church asking Paulie to raise the crew's donation from 10 grand to 50 grand to cover certain costs. Paulie, wow. That was a fucking bad one. Paulie tells the priest that ain't happening as the priest starts playing hardball with Paulie, saying that they're considering pulling out of the festival due to Paulie and Patsy's criminal element, whatever that means, and revokes their privilege of using a golden hat to put on top of the Saint Altier statue, which Paulie accuses them of only doing because he won't fork up 50 grand before leaving with Patsy. Tony tells the guys about a trip to Pennsylvania he'll be taking with Chris, as Chris reveals that he's officially gotten married to Kelly with a baby on the way, and later, Chris fucks up the directions to Pennsylvania as Tony stops over for a piss, and they spot a couple of bikers jacking crates of wine from a building, which Tony and Chris happily help themselves to. Chris holds the two bikers at gunpoint as they tell Chris not to mess with them since they're with the Vipers, a comment that Chris mocks them for as he pushes the two over the edge and shoots one of their tires, resulting in a shootout that Chris wins as he lands a shot while Tony drives away. They park at a restaurant and revel in the spoils of war by bringing in 2 bottles of wine from one of the crates.
How about that prick's face when he saw the gat?
Chris and Tony talk about that prick's face when he saw the gat as Tony sips from a cup of wine in front of Chris all slowly, doing that gurgling shit as loudly as he can to tempt Chris even more. Chris talks about wanting to set limits for himself as Tony pours Chris a glass of wine anyway, which Chris gives into. They chug back a bottle of wine in the parking lot as they reflect on how special the connection is between them, with Chris mentioning that Tony saved his life many times as Tony points out that he's helped him through tough times as well. Chris mentions one incident in particular that Tony had his back during, that being the day he went over to Tony's house to inform him that Adriana was a rat. And we're finally shown what happened on that day as the show gives us a flashback. Fun fact, the scene was actually initially supposed to be in long-term parking, but Dre De Matteo made the suggestion of cutting the scene out and using it at a later date so that Adriana's death would be even more of a shock to the audience. Which I gotta say, brilliant suggestion on her part. In what just might be one of the best acted scenes of the show, Chris breaks down crying as he confesses to Tony that Adriana's been working for the feds, saying that he can't bring himself to do anything to Adriana as Tony comforts him in his arms. He tells Chris to go out and get a coffee and that he'll get a call from him when everything's said and done. And Chris walks upstairs as the show cuts back to the present day. As amazing as this scene is, I'm still very glad that they ended up not using it for long-term parking and gave it to this episode instead. The impact of Adriana's murder hits a lot harder without it on a first viewing. I love the way that the show implements shaky cam for this scene to really place you smack dab in the middle of this horrible situation. And Michael Imperioli's acting in this scene is incredible. You feel so sympathetic toward his plight, despite the fact that he's the one arranging Adriana's murder. And the moment that Tony tones down his anger and comforts Chris is really heartbreaking. It's probably the closest that Tony and Chris have ever felt in a scene together. It feels like I'm watching a father and a son have an emotional heart-to-heart. If only Tony were this understanding every episode instead of having the guy with an addiction to alcohol drink more alcohol. Chris tells Tony that he loves him as Tony hesitates for a moment before telling him the same, and they hug each other before riding back to New Jersey. We watch Tony prepare an awfully hot coffee pot as Chris and Kelly head to an open house, and the crews head down to the feast, where Tony takes Phil aside to offer him a 50-50 split on a truck full of Centrum multivitamins, which Phil agrees to, saying that they shouldn't tell Johnny Sack about this, which Tony also agrees to. He waves at 2 ladies riding a roller coaster as the show reveals that one of those ladies is Juliana, which shocks Tony for a hot second. Meanwhile, Carm meets with Meadow and Finn as Meadow spots Adriana's mother, who Carm goes up to say hi to. It's revealed that Adriana's mother is not exactly doing so great after her daughter's disappearance, and she tells Carmela that Adriana is dead, saying that the FBI came to her home and admitted that Chris might have gotten her murdered. While Carmela claims that Adriana ran from home and reminds her that the two never really had a solid relationship, Adriana's mother remains firm on her stance and angrily storms off. Chris talks to the weapons guy about him having a kid and how he'll take better care of his home than his mom did growing up. And he gives the weapons guy some cash along with some heroin, telling the guy that he really ought to seek some help to stop his heroin addiction instead of just not giving the heroin to him. The weapons guy starts using it in front of Chris as Chris becomes tempted, saying that heroin really wets his whistle as the guy offers some to Chris, which Chris says he'll try a little of. We're given this really sad scene of Chris predictably relapsing back to his old heroin ways, as he lays down on the park bench close to the festival while a stray dog rustles through garbage in the background, which Chris befriends during his trip. He stays around the festival until far past closing time, as the lights turn off around him while he continues slouching over in the heroin position. The church brings out Saint Altier as multiple people in the crowd point out that he's not wearing the golden hat, and Tony looks around the place for food, luckily not finding Uncle Ben again so he doesn't pass out. Carm tells Tony about her encounter with Adriana's mother at the festival, saying that she believes that Chris killed Adriana, which prompts Tony to go, "What? No, that's crazy. That would never happen." Tony starts coping by saying that if Chris really did kill her, the FBI would have taken him in by now. And Carm mentions that the FBI came to Adriana's house as Tony says that only proves his point, making a Freudian slip in the process.
Sour grapes, Carm. He dumps her daughter, all of a sudden he's Scott fucking Peterson.
I thought A dumped him.
Oops! Tony says that Chris is now a different person anyway. Well, with a new wife, new house, new kid on the way, relapsing back into heroin, he's doing great. At the festival, Paulie gets a call from his doctor and finds out that he might have a prostate cancer diagnosis in his future. And Janice forces Bobby Jr. to go on a ride with her and baby Nika as baby Nika starts bawling her eyes out. Things turn sour really quickly as the ride suddenly malfunctions, leaving one of the kids on the ride with a bloody nose and broken teeth. And of course, Janice acts like everyone around her just got shot and starts losing her shit.
Oh my God, call an ambulance!
Little Paulie informs regular Paulie of the incident with the ride, but Paulie says that's boring and tells little Paulie to deal with it while he deals with his biopsy. We later see the completion of the Sopranos' Cone of Shame trilogy, which started with Chris, then with Phil, and now finally with Janice, who's playing up her neck injury as Bobby arrives at the ride operator's hotel room to beat the shit out of him. He demands the ride operator for money as he reveals to Bobby that Paulie was the one who prevented the ride from being properly repaired, and were taken to the festival's cannoli eating contest, which is quickly interrupted by a furious Bobby, who loudly chastises Paulie for cheaping out on the carnival rides and demanding Paulie for money while Paulie tells him to fuck off. The crowd stares at Paulie for being a cheap ass as Paulie ends the cannoli contest early, and Paulie later calls his doctor for the results of his biopsy, with no luck. Paulie runs into Nucci at the festival, and she brings up the ride malfunction, saying that Paulie not having St. Altier wear his golden hat is what caused it in the first place. And Paulie says that Nucci's a lame loser and walks away, leaving her in tears once again. The crew have dinner and celebrate Chris's marriage, and everyone's happy and making jokes until Paulie walks into the room, souring the mood as everyone sits around awkwardly, with Bobby in particular rising up from his seat and leaving dinner early. Paulie tries making a joke to lighten the mood as nobody laughs, and Tony demands Paulie to settle his beef with Bobby, saying that they're losing money and goodwill on the festival as Paulie complains that he's not making a profit either. He admits to Tony that he's got a lot on his mind, mentioning his biopsy as Tony tells him that biopsies usually come back clean 9 out of 10 times anyway and to get a grip, saying that negative thinking will only make these worries worsen. Tony sorts his wine bottles in the basement as Chris reveals that he sold the bottles that he kept, and the two awkwardly sit around for a moment before Tony reminds Chris of the prick's face when he saw the gat, which makes the two laugh for a moment. Paulie has trouble sleeping at night as he watches the time turn to 3 o'clock, calling back to Chris's vision of hell from back in season 2, which makes sense that Paulie would worry about it considering his recent turn of bad luck and misfortune and also something else that's about to happen. He calls the doctor for a check-in on his biopsy before changing his mind and heading to the Bing to open it up, and as he walks around, well, again, I just want to reiterate something. There is no direct confirmation on whether or not heaven and hell actually exist in the Sopranos universe. And no, you're not allowed to bring up Many Saints in Newark. That does not count. That absolutely does not count. It was a stupid stinger line to close off the movie. But this moment right here is about the closest thing we get to some direct divine intervention. Because hey, look in the mirror before Paulie looks around. That's the Virgin Mary. I saw a comment back in my season 2 video pointing out that a lot of the weird supernatural shit that happens in the show seems to be directed at Paulie for some reason. And I think that's such a funny detail because despite all of this, Paulie never changes once in the show. Even after witnessing the Virgin Mary appear before him in the Bing, he still keeps on being his same usual self, never reflecting on the crimes he's committed in his life and the people he's hurt to get to the position that he's in. To put into perspective just how wild it is, I want you to close your eyes and imagine something for me. I don't care if you're driving, keep those peepers closed. Okay, actually maybe I shouldn't say that, keep them open if you're driving.
Around.
Imagine that you're also a criminal affiliated with the mafia. You've killed dozens of people, you've stolen, you've lied, you've cheated, the whole shebang. Then one day as you're opening up a strip club, you look behind you and witness the Virgin Mary floating in front of you for a brief moment as loud rock music plays in the background. I don't care how fucking far gone I am, my life as I know it has been altered. I'm going to therapy, I'm going to church, I'm repenting my sins, I'm becoming a pastor, I don't care, everything's changing. The fact that Paulie barely even considers the implications of what just happened to him after this shows just how evil these guys can be. God himself could come down and tell them that they're going to hell for what they've done, and they'd still stay in the mob. It makes you wonder what would have happened had these visions occurred to another much less bumbling member of the crew like Silvio or Bobby. Would they have done some major self-reflection and changed for the better, or would they have just briefly acknowledged it and changed only a little bit before moving on like what Paulie's about to do? Paulie lets a mob associate into the Bing, still a bit stunned from what just happened. And the family walks around the festival as baby Nika cries that she can't go on the ride, going as far as to walk over to the ride and scream to the heavens for mercy. And Tony decides to give Nika a spin that won't make her lose a bunch of teeth.
Whoa! Where's our belly?
It's the fucking... It's like she's the baby and she's happy. And Tony's happy. Okay, facetiousness aside, this scene makes me weirdly emotional. It's been established already that Tony has quite the soft spot, not only for animals, but for babies too. Likely because of the fact that they both have a sense of innocence to them that can't be found in your average human adult. So to watch Tony, this irredeemable monster, go up to Nika and carry her around in the air all happily hits me with a strange wave of emotions. It's like watching Bigfoot take care of a duckling. It's a very sweet, out-of-nowhere moment from the show, and it's one of the rare times that Tony seems like a genuinely good person. You know that he's not doing this to put up a front or to seem nicer than he really is. He's just doing something good because he honestly enjoys it. As a result of his brief encounter with the Virgin Mary, Paulie heads back to Nucci's apartment, seemingly ready to make amends as he sits down to watch Lawrence Welk on Nucci's noticeably shittier TV. Nucci offers Paulie some cookies as Paulie respectfully declines, and he notices the wind blowing out the window as he watches the program with Nucci, and the show fades to black, ending the episode. This episode is so fucking good. I love the way that Adriana's character casts such a looming shadow over this episode, specifically with Carm, Tony, and Chris, with Chris in particular relapsing back on heroin. I believe that he does this not only because he was reminded of Adriana's death, as shown by the flashback earlier this episode, but also because Tony is continuing to disrespect his wishes by peer pressuring him into consuming more alcohol, despite the fact that Chris basically gave away his girlfriend in the name of loyalty. I believe that unhealthy relationship is shown even better in the scene where Tony and Chris uncomfortably stand around while Tony stacks wine, only sparking up a conversation by doing another round of recounting that prick's face when he saw a gat. I believe that we're shown this scene because we're meant to question whether or not Chris and Tony's relationship is even close enough for Chris to justify murdering his girlfriend like that. Did he do it because he genuinely cares for Tony and his crew, or did he only do it to preserve his lifestyle? Does he love Tony for who he is, or does he only love him for what he can give to him? Even during their emotional heart-to-heart at the restaurant, they never really go into detail and say why they love each other. They just kind of say that they do. Not only was the conflict with Adriana engaging, but I found the rest of the episode to be pretty fantastic too. The final scene with Paulie quietly reconciling with Nucci by sitting next to her while watching TV just might be one of my favorite endings in all of The Sopranos. Barely a word was uttered between the two, but there didn't need to be, which I think is kind of beautiful. Paulie staring at the wind blowing out the window could represent a higher power being happy with Paulie's decision, though maybe that's a stretch. I love the scene of Tony and Chris defeating the prick who saw the gat, Tony and Chris discussing said prick who saw said gat, along with the two discussing their relationship after discussing said prick who saw said gat. Also the flashback. I'd keep going with all the scenes that I like, but we'd be here all day. Man, this episode is great. I'm giving this one a high S tier. Extremely underrated. Season 6, Episode 10. Moe N Joe. Johnny's lawyer informs him that the trial is coming soon and that the judge has evaluated Johnny's net worth at $5 million, which makes Johnny want to shoot his dick off considering the fact that the government's going to be seizing most of those assets. Despite this, Johnny still refuses to rat to the government as Janice walks into Satriale's with baby Nika to complain that she hasn't gotten her stuffed pork loin. And Tony shits on Bobby by implying that Nika got most of her genes from Janice, as Janice retorts back by accusing Tony of screwing her and Bobby over by not making Bobby captain, claiming it's because Bobby married her and that Tony hating Janice is what's preventing him from getting promoted in the crew. She mentions how much he cared and cried for Tony while he was in the hospital, as Tony says that even if he did promote Bobby, Janice would still be complaining to him, which causes Janice to storm out of the store. Vito gets exposed by Jim at the library as he finds out that he isn't really a sports writer, and Vito finally admits to Jim that he's not a writer from Scottsdale, but rather some dude from New Jersey who's on the run, mentioning his wife and kids and the fact that he's running out of money fast. Jim sympathizes with Vito's situation and offers to get him a job, and the mob wives celebrate Ginny's 50th birthday, with Ginny talking about how things aren't exactly great with the family while Angie deals with mob business on the side. Vito and Jim lay in bed together and get romantical, which is followed up by what just might be the most inappropriate transition in the history of The Sopranos. For those of you who might not understand this, the train represents Jim's penis, and the tunnel represents Vito's butthole. Bobby tries getting Bobby Jr. invested in this train hobby and fails miserably. And Carm asks Tony for like the 8th time to convince the building inspector to approve Carm's spec house, as Tony says that he had little Paulie handle it and that Silvio's gonna try and help soon to make some progress. Later, he gives Silvio the building inspector's location as Ginny Sack's brother enters with a nice pen for Tony. And her brother tells Tony that Johnny wants Tony to convince two brothers of a heavy equipment leasing operation in New Orleans to sell their company so that Johnny can get a nice chunk of change, specifically telling Tony not to involve Phil in the deal. Vito does some construction work thanks to Jim and realizes that he's not built for this shit, as he gets caught napping on the job. And Carm tells Tony that she's gonna be interviewing a new contractor for the spec house, saying that this contractor worked on Johnny Sack's mansion and that Janice specifically said it looked beautiful. Tony, the petty bitch he is, refuses to give his sister literally any in and chastises Carm for not having her father work on the house. And Carm asks why the hell he suddenly cares about her father so much as Tony doesn't answer and plops his Jimmy Johns on his plate. Tony complains to Melfi about Carm spending a lot of time on the spec spec house, as well as his earlier encounter with Janice, bringing up fond childhood memories of him and Janice spending time in the pork store when they were younger. He admits to Melfi that Janice is right and that he does treat her and Bobby poorly, saying that he actually revels in Bobby and Janice's misery and claims that Janice only does nice things to exclusively benefit herself. He brings up a time in his childhood when Janice was left to take care of Tony and how she once recorded a tape of Tony and Barbara having a fight and used it as blackmail for a month so that he'd do random shit for Janice. Melfi asks if Barbara also had to face that punishment from Janice as Tony goes, "Who cares about Barb? The only person that matters here is me! Me! Ginny's brother fails at delivering secret mob exposition and gets chastised by Johnny for it, attempting to say that Tony's accepting his earlier offer but that he wants a larger cut of cash, which Johnny reluctantly accepts.
Did you pick up the birthday cake for Jin, the marzipan flowers?
The stuff behind the pool?
No, an actual fucking cake.
Vito meets the firefighter guys at dinner while Jim gives him a dirty look. And one of the firefighters tells Vito that he'll probably forget about them when he lands a publishing deal, leading to Jim giving Vito an even dirtier look while Vito just kind of sits there. Vito is reminded of the fact that he's not living the mafia lifestyle anymore as he tries convincing everyone to gamble with him while everyone leaves. And Bobby makes collections in the middle of the night when he's suddenly beaten up and robbed by a bunch of preteens, who nearly kill Bobby by shooting his eye out.
Shit! What the fuck you doing, man? Why you pull that trigger?
Yeah, remember what I was saying earlier about The Sopranos going from some horrific story-changing event to a random scene of people eating dinner? Well, guess what? It wasn't a joke. This actually happens. This show should have won more Emmys. The show cuts to Tony eating dinner with the two brothers mentioned earlier to get them to sell, saying that the business is worth around $6 million. It says that the brothers would give Johnny's half to him, which the brothers think is way too high, as Tony reminds them that Johnny's loan was what helped kickstart their operation, saying that it's time to cash in. Later that night, Tony gets a call from Polly, who informs Tony that the doctors caught signs of prostate cancer early and are putting him through tests, saying that this cancer news stays between them only, which, judging by Tony's past behavior, ain't happening.
Hello?
Uncle June's got cancer.
The guys talk about Bobby's horrific injury as Tony still makes fun of and criticizes him regardless because he's a piece of shit, which makes the guys sit around awkwardly. And Tony later watches football with Bobby while Janice snatches Bobby's beer from him, with Bobby Jr. wanting to go to his friend's house for the Chargers game. Bobby and Janice tell Bobby Jr. that's not happening and either finish his Spanish report or read his report out loud and embarrass himself, with Tony impressed by how well Bobby and Janice are raising and disciplining their children as he later talks about Bobby's incident with Melfi, saying that Janice loves reveling in the misery of it all as Melfi points out a certain other someone in Tony's family who also loved reveling in misery. He talks about how Janice used to be built and how guys in the neighborhood would do nice things for Tony just so they could get into Janice's pants. And Melfi asks if Tony was sexually threatened, saying that Janice might have been the focus of Tony's early sexual feelings, mentioning the fact that he just described her as built and that they spent hours playing in a pork store together, and you know what that means. Tony is obviously disgusted by this as he tells Melfi about how Janice left home early after fighting with Livia, and proves to Melfi that even after all this time, he still harbors resentment toward Janice for leaving him with Livia, saying that the one thing he inherited was Livia, and that Janice doesn't deserve to be cut into the mob life and that it's all mine. During this rant, he briefly mentions how Janice got laid by people around the neighborhood like he's jealous of this, as we cut to Vito making dinner for Jim while That's Amore plays in the background, with the two sharing a heartfelt moment with each other.
I love you.
I love you, Johnny Cakes.
What a terrible nickname. We're presented with what just might be the most relatable scene in Sopranos history as Vito does some construction work, hoping that it's 12 o'clock as he tells himself not to look at his watch in order to save that feeling. At some point he gets tired of this and finally takes a look.
Now.
Fuck me!
Jim wakes up the next morning and finds out that Vito completely ditched his ass and is currently trekking out of New Hampshire. Johnny's lawyer tells Johnny that he's currently looking at 15 years in prison along with $4.1 million worth of his assets being taken. A deal that Johnny agrees to while Vito makes his way back to New Jersey, fooling around extra hard as he drinks while listening to My Way by Francis Albert. Meadow complains to Tony about trouble she's having with Finn while Tony microwaves some shit, saying that Finn barely even sleeps with her anymore. And Tony says something about living in sin with some guy before Meadow storms off offendedly. Tony walks into the big old pissy and fucks over Karn by having Silvio not meet with a building inspector. And Vito fools around a little too hard and gets into a little accidoodle. Vito tries offering the guy cash to go on his merry way as the guy says that they should file a police report. Insistent on this as Vito realizes that he's gonna be fucked if he doesn't end this soon. So he does. Afterwards, Vito effortlessly exits the scene. Tony Tony tells Johnny's brother that he's not really feeling up to helping Johnny convince the two brothers to sell, and comes up with a new deal instead, promising to get the brothers to sell on the condition that they sell Johnny's house to Janice and Bobby for a discounted price, which Johnny very reluctantly accepts, realizing that he can't really do much, being in jail and all. Tony lies to Carm and tells her that Silvio didn't have any luck leaning on the building inspector, telling Carm that she should just give up and sell the spec house, which leaves Carm in shambles. Ginny is similarly left in shambles as Janice explores around the house with a real estate agent, and Johnny allocutes in court and admits that he was a part of the New York crime family, which his crew criticizes him for, saying that he should have stood trial instead of taking a plea agreement and that you'd never admit the existence of this thing, ever. Tony and Silvio discuss how disgusted they are about Johnny pleading guilty, with Silvio wishing he could throw acid in his face as Sal asks if he can finally stop working on the Sacrimoni household since Johnny's pled guilty, which Tony agrees to, though he tells Sal that Johnny pled guilty, meaning that he didn't really actually kill anyone. Vito briefly fools around by the pork store before flooring it out of there, and Janice talks to Tony about the deal with Johnny's house, thanking him for this favor. She starts forcing some tears out to seem even more thankful, which annoys Tony as Carm comes down to comfort Janice, and she brings her upstairs while Tony puts away his wine, ending the episode. This one was pretty good. I wasn't kidding earlier when I said Tony was gonna get worse this season. Like, okay, I completely understand why he's pissed with Janice, even though I think he's way too, oh, poor me about the whole situation. Like, you weren't the only one who had to deal with Olivia's shitty attitude. In a way, I still understand his frustrations with Janice, but why does Bobby have to face your wrath as well? He's Bobby, how could you hate him? It's not his fault that you want to fuck your sister, subconsciously anyway, I think. It's at least sort of nice that Tony finally decided to give Janice a taste by letting her buy Johnny's house off of him, but even this good deed comes at the cost of Johnny and Carm, as Johnny ends up losing out on more precious assets while Carm gets the short end of the stick because Tony was lazy and didn't want to deal with a spec house. Every day is a gift, and that gift is apparently shitting on everyone he knows and loves. I love the fact that Sal's I don't want to work on Johnny's lawn arc finally properly concludes in this episode. And my favorite scene has got to be Vito crashing into the guy's car and then drunkenly making off when the situation's over.
What do you say, $5?
No.
6?
No.
I find it both hilarious and also a little sad that Vito is willing to give up what is overall a pretty solid life to risk getting killed by mafia guys because he's not willing to do menial labor, but we'll get back to that later. Overall, I'm feeling a low 8 here on this one. Season 6, Episode 11, Cold Stones. Tony walks in an argument between AJ and Carm, who reveals to Tony that AJ had been fired from Blockbuster weeks ago and that he hadn't told either Tony or Carmela. He claims that he can't make a livable income off of Blockbuster, as Carm points out that he doesn't need a livable income because Carm and Tony let him live at home and eat rent-free. And AJ retaliates by saying that he deserves to have a social life and brings up how expensive clubs are, as if clubbing is the only way he can have a social life. Carm struggles to sleep that night as she talks about how worried she is about AJ's future, saying that he's worryingly apathetic as Tony says that they just spoiled him a little too much and that he'll be fine. Meadow decides to guarantee that Carm won't be getting sleep tonight and tells Tony and Carm that she's planning on going to California for an indefinite period of time to spend time with Finn, saying that she doesn't quite know yet if she wants to go to law or med school, as AJ listens in from outside and walks away sad as he realizes how much of a fucking chud he is. Carm implies that Meadow is disgusting for wanting to spend time with a man, as Meadow kisses Carm and Tony goodnight. And the next day, Phil and Tony haggle over no-show jobs at Costco, as Phil mentions that the truck full of Centrum multivitamins was not well maintained and had pills all over the floor, implying that he got shorted on the deal as Tony ignores him and leaves. Carm reveals to Tony that Meadow's not the only one planning on leaving, as she says that she plans on leaving to a trip to Paris that she won at the silent auction of the feast, and criticizes Tony for not listening to her the first time she told him this, as Tony asks if they can go to Italy instead. But Carm says that Tony doesn't need to go and that Rosalie can go with her instead. Later, Tony hangs around a mall as Vito suddenly appears behind him, saying that he probably shouldn't do anything to him right now since his brother is watching from the other side. The other side of the mall, I mean. Vito uses the absolutely brilliant excuse that the reason he started having gay thoughts was because of the medication he took for his blood pressure, which, you know, sure. And he says that he's willing to pay Tony $200,000 up front for a spot back in the game. And Tony leaves as he later talks to the crew about the situation, with Silvio saying that most of the crew members will want Vito gone, especially Phil, with Tony saying fuck Phil and that he's just trying to seem super tough so that he'll become the next boss. Tony says that Vito could even potentially make them some nice cash if they keep him around, and later gives Carm some money for a trip to Paris and a new Louis Vuitton bag.
Now this is the real Louis Vuitton.
Vito finally meets with his family again in the fancy restaurant at the Rockefeller Center and tells his kids that they can't tell anyone that he's back home, claiming that he's a CIA agent on a super secret mission. He later tells Marie that he can move back in with them once things are straightened out with Tony and claims that he's definitely not gay anymore. And Vito later tries calling Jim to apologize for leaving out of nowhere, which Jim is actually surprisingly accepting of.
Fuck you.
Okay. Vito says that he missed his kids too much, as Jim claims that Vito only missed his old lifestyle too much, saying to never call him again, which leaves Vito sad. Carmen and Rosalie make their way to Paris while Tony meets with Phil, who wastes absolutely no time getting down to business.
Heard on 1010 Windsor, tunnels a parking lot. I hope you didn't get caught in that.
You said you're gonna take care of that fucking Finoik.
Oh, for Christ's sake. Fucking Vito again? What the fuck is wrong with you?
Rosalie and Carm hang out in a French restaurant as Carm looks at a guidebook and finds a section on Abelard and Heloise, based off the book that Mr. Wegler told Carm about back in season 5. And the two enjoy being surrounded by the beautiful language of French.
And the check, please.
Je l'amène tout de suite.
I don't know what the fuck he said.
Carm and Rosalie get lost trying to make their way to the Louvre and end up finding themselves in the middle of some memorable sights in Paris like the Eiffel Tower. They admire the beautiful art around them as the show immediately contrasts this beauty with one of my all-time favorite Silvio lines.
Make sure you clean that shit off with Pitt.
Tony tells Silvio that he's changed his mind and that Vito's gotta go since he's causing too many business issues with New York, saying that Vito should have lived that lifestyle quietly, as Silvio points out that he already basically was. Phil's wife Patty tells Phil that she doesn't want to go to a Catholic meeting tomorrow due to her shame with Vito, and Carm watches a man teach children in a church, and she and Rosalie pray while Tony gets his dick sucked by Wendy from Breaking Bad. Soon after, Tony gets a call from Vito, who Tony promises to meet with at the mall so that they can discuss business / roll out Vito's exit plan, if you get what I'm saying. If you don't get what I'm saying, it means that Vito is going to get dragged out and killed. I probably didn't even need to bother explaining that though, because once Vito heads back to his motel, he's surprised by a handful of special guests. I love that really quick no that Vito lets out. No! Phil hilariously makes a dramatic entrance out of the closet, and he quietly sits down next to Vito and calls him a disgrace before commanding his guys to murder him, gripping the bedsheets while Vito is bludgeoned to death with a pool cue. Before we move on, I want to discuss a Sopranos fan theory that I fully endorse and wholeheartedly believe. Phil Leotardo is secretly gay. Let me explain. I believe his fervent hatred of homosexuality is simply projection on Phil's part, and that he's trying his damnedest to repress and ignore his own personal feelings. While most of the folks working in the mob are homophobic to some capacity, none of them are nearly as passionate and as vocal about their hatred than Phil. And I do not believe this is because he just happens to be like that. Phil doesn't bring it up very often in the show, but he had to serve a 20-year-long prison sentence due to his involvement in the mob. And the thing about prison is, there are no women to play Battleship with.
There's no women there.
He'll later claim to Tony that, to compromise for this, he jacked off in a tissue for many years. But like, do you really believe him when he says this? I mean, for God's sake, when he initially confronts Vito in his hotel room, he emerges out of Vito's closet. He comes out of the closet when interacting with a gay man. You can't write this shit. Wait, I mean, well, yeah, you can. How long do you think he was in there, by the way? Do you think he was in there the whole time, or was he hiding off to the side, noticed Vito approaching, and was like, go, 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 go? Anyways, Phil's self-hatred of his own homosexuality can be seen clearly with his hatred of Vito, with his constant conversations of how nauseating his gayness is, as well as him consistently asking Tony to whack Vito. It gets to the point that he even hates it when a man simply gets emotional, as seen with his conversation with the guys after Johnny cried at his daughter's wedding. I firmly believe that this is all simply Phil projecting the hell out of his true feelings onto everyone else around him, specifically Vito. Look at the way he grips those bedsheets as Vito gets beaten. It's clear that he's getting some kind of sick pleasure out of murdering another fellow gay man, though whether that pleasure is sexual or otherwise is up to interpretation. Maybe he's a dom and he's really into that kinky shit. Like murder. There's a few other details regarding this theory that we'll get into later, but there's one more that I want to bring up real quick that I found while researching this theory that's kind of amazing. Last season, we watched Phil be a stubborn bitch with Angie as he constantly complained that his car wasn't being repaired correctly. That car was a red 1998 Lincoln Town car, which one Reddit user has pointed out contains a double locking feature in the trunk, making it much harder to insert things in the back. No, I'm not kidding. This user was implying that Phil subconsciously bought a car that made it difficult to put loads in the back of, and that represents Phil's hatred and shame of his homosexuality and gay battleship. This is probably a joke theory, but I'm including it here anyway because the detail lines up a little too well with Phil's character, especially when you consider the fact that Phil kept complaining that his seats weren't straight enough in the car. Carm continues enjoying the sights in France while Bobby informs the crew that Vito was murdered in his hotel room and that he had a pool cue shoved up his ass, which leaves the crew in a stunned silence. Tony says that it's pretty obvious that Phil was responsible for this, but that Phil was in a tough situation, and that things with Vito probably would have been the same had Tony gotten to him first. Tony tells Silvio that he believes Phil murdering Vito was a way for Phil to go, haha, I killed a maid captain of your family and you won't do nothing. And they discuss whether or not they should whack one of Phil's guys before Tony suggests that they could hurt Phil financially instead. AJ laughs his balls off while talking in a chat room as Tony walks up and looks absolutely disgusted. This is undoctored footage of me making a YouTube video. I said Battleship again. Rosalie gets the number of this hot French guy while walking around and taking in the sights and the art of France. And Carm talks about how many generations of people lived in the city of Paris before bringing up Tony saying, "Who am I and where am I going?" at the hospital, saying that she feels the same way right now before breaking down in tears. Maria is comforted by Patty about Vito's death, saying that Vito's face was unrecognizable to Phil before Phil demands that a TV channel featuring a bunch of muscular bodybuilders be turned off, once again alluding to Phil's secret gay feelings that he's trying his hardest to suppress. Phil tells Marie that he'll plan Vito's funeral arrangements as Patty starts crying about their tailor going blind. And Tony talks to Melfi about how he hates his son.
How about the fact that I hate my son?
Mentioning him talking in a chat room in his underwear earlier and how he wants to smash his face in. Melfi says that Tony seems to be angry that AJ's behavior doesn't align with the behavior that Tony's father would have wanted, as Tony hypothesizes that AJ would have shaped up a lot better if Carm just let him beat the shit out of him. Though Melfi says that AJ would have likely taken that anger out on others as well, much like Tony, which Tony doesn't respond to. Carm and Rosalie eat at a fancy restaurant as Carm brings up Rosalie lighting 2 candles at the church for Jackie and Jackie Jr. She tries starting a conversation with Rosalie about Jackie Jr. as Rosalie criticizes her for this, saying that she can't do anything about his death and asking Carm why she has to bring New Jersey business to Paris. And we cut back to New Jersey, where Fat Dom, one of the guys who murdered Vito, makes a visit to Satriel's to give some money to Silvio as well as give his condolences about Vito's death, making a plethora of jokes about the situation as Carlo and Silvio warn him to chill his ball busting. Dom chooses not to chill his ball busting and ends up getting his ass beaten and stabbed and killed and died. Tony later arrives at the pork store only to find the door locked, and finds out that Silvio and Carlo murdered Dom, prompting Tony to angrily exit the scene. He gives someone a call on his drive back while AJ and his friends play Perfect Dark Zero, and Tony drags him outside, informing AJ that he got him a job in construction and that he can keep every penny he makes, saying that he simply wants him to do good and that he loves him. AJ says that this is bullshit and that he doesn't want to do any work for money, but Tony says that he'd better work the job or else he's gonna take everything away from AJ, like his clothes and Carm's cooking and his car window. Never mind, he took that already. Back in Paris, Carmela has another Adriana dream, where Adriana tells Carm that she found Little Cassette, and this guy tells Carm that she needs to tell Adriana that she's dead before Carm wakes up, still clearly concerned about what really happened to Adriana. She later walks toward a jewelry store while waiting for Rosalie to get her shit, staring at a statue of a woman as well as a tower shining a bright light, paralleling the beacon that Tony saw in his coma dream. She finally arrives back in New Jersey and talks about how great Paris was while Vito Jr. and Francesca read a news article about Vito's death, revealing Vito's mafia status as well as him being gay, which leave the 2 kids in disbelief that Vito wasn't really a spy after all. The person who did Vito's photo shoot from all the way back in the first episode this season also finds out this information, finding the picture of Vito as the show fades to black, ending the episode. This episode was pretty good, but not amazing. I kind of enjoyed Carm's material in this episode, what with her waxing philosophical with Rosalie while taking in the sights, though most of the time it kind of felt like we were just being dragged along while Rosalie and Carm dicked around in Paris. Vito's death scene was very memorable, mostly because of Phil's dramatic entrance. And I gotta say, Vito having this whole plotline this season with him meeting Johnny Cake's gym and finding a new life and new people to be with, only for him to just throw that all away because he misses how easy the mob life was, is equal parts funny and tragic. We get an almost reversal of Gene's plotline in the season opener, where instead of watching a man desperately try and wiggle his way out of the mob life only for the walls to close in on him and seal his fate, we watch someone actually make his escape only for him to return and chain himself back to the golden handcuffs that he so longed for. It makes you wonder if Gene would have done the same thing if he were in Vito's position, or hell, any member of the crew. Vito had the perfect second life and he threw it all away, literally putting his life on the line, all so he could get back to living the mafia lifestyle. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I know that there are a lot of people out there who aren't really fans of Vito's whole subplot in the first half of season 6, but personally I enjoyed it. I liked watching his conflicts with Jim as well as him meeting all the other residents of New Hampshire. And I also like the way the plotline shows us how desperate some of these mafia guys would be if they were separated from the lifestyle they lived so long in, as well as how it kickstarts some bigger conflict down the road this season. Personally, I don't know if I would have drugged it out for 5 episodes, but hey, at least it didn't feel like it was dragging on, for me anyway. Overall, I'm feeling a B tier for this one. Season 6, Episode 12, Kaisha. The episode opens up with a dedication to John T. Patterson, a director for The Sopranos who unfortunately passed away from prostate cancer at the age of 64. He directed a lot of notable episodes of The Sopranos, including Employee of the Month, The Happy Wanderer, and Whitecaps. He also directed every other season finale up to season 5, which is why he's getting a dedication here, the final episode of season 6A. Rest in peace. Carlo disposes of the last of Dom's body parts while Phil cheats on his wife with his Gumar, talking about how great it would be if nothing exploded right now. Benny calls Tony to inform him that the explosion was a success and that it swept Phil and his Gumar off their feet. And the next day, Tony signs some papers to officially hand over the chicken property to Jamba Juice, and apologizes to Juliana about what happened the last time they interacted, but decides, fuck that being loyal shit, let's go out to dinner, which Juliana rejects. Kelly tells Chris not to worry so much about whether or not the pregnancy will actually be a success, saying that she doesn't have issues like Adriana did, as the show cuts to Carm looking at Adriana's mother in the hospital, unconscious. Carm later tells Tony that Adriana's mom is in the hospital after trying to off herself due to her continued grief from losing Adriana. She also tells Tony about her most recent Adriana dream, as Tony says that Adriana's mom is just coping with the fact that Adriana moved away because she didn't like her, which Carm points out is a weird thing to say, considering the fact that Meadow just did basically the exact same thing. Tony asks Chris during a football game if he's got a new Gumar yet, and Chris confirms this and reveals that she's black, which surprises Bobby and Tony, as Chris says that he doesn't want to bring her around so that she doesn't have to listen to any of Paulie's racial tirades. Honestly, I don't think it's Paulie that Chris should be worried about. AJ works at the construction site and gets distracted by this hot lady named Blanca, who Paulie gives a kiss on the cheek before being greeted by AJ, who stares at Blanca, ready to get some lovin' going. It's revealed that there's some other lovin' going on between Chris and Juliana, dun dun, who play Battleship with each other, as Chris talks to her about how he feels like he rushed his relationship with Kelly and that he doesn't really want to have kids with her. And several crew members attend a meeting hosted by local genius Carmine Jr., where they discuss Vito's death costing Tony and the rest of the crew a lot of money, while Phil brings up how Fat Dom has been MIA for a hot second, subtly accusing Tony and company of whacking the guy. Carmine Jr. tries to settle the conflict by saying that all these deaths are going to do nothing but cost both crews money and that they should put an end to it, which Phil and Tony agree to, and things seem to be going well until Carmine decides that it would be a good idea to keep talking.
Your brother Billy, whatever happened there?
All right, then.
Whatever
happened there?
The shooting.
Whatever happened there?
God rest his soul, man.
Remember what I said back in season 4 about Carmine Jr. being deceivingly smart and able to read a room well? Well, I kind of forgot that that's not always the case. I love how Carmine Jr. reiterates to Phil, yeah, the shooting, like he wasn't literally there experiencing it firsthand. Phil angrily leaves the room as Tony asks why the fuck Carmine had to bring up Billy's death, and AJ drinks at a bar and notices Blanca dancing from afar, who walks up to AJ and chats with him, saying that she has a 3-year-old son named Hector before giving AJ her phone number, giving the napkin a little kiss as a special touch. Keep your head in the game, AJ, you're on a hot streak, don't lose focus. Tony later calls Juliana and asks her about a warehouse that he wants to purchase so that he can fix it and that Juliana can flip it, an offer that Juliana considers. And the show zooms in on her as we see her discussing her issues with alcoholism. And we see Chris and Juliana meet for the first time after the AA meeting, revealing the segment to be a flashback. Chris tells Juliana that he frequents the pork store as Juliana realizes that she might have a second shot to get dirty with the mob, accepting Chris's offer to get coffee, which escalates quickly. Carm tells Tony that they should hire a professional to try and track Adriana down, saying that Adriana could be in trouble, as the show cuts to Tony telling Silvio to lean in the building inspector so that it'll distract Carm from her worries regarding Adriana. Juliana and Tony walk around the warehouse as Tony tries making another move on Juliana, and Juliana responds by telling Tony to drop it and storming out. Chris and Juliana later discuss Chris's Cleaver script as she asks if the evil boss character is anything like Tony Soprano, and Chris says that there's a few similarities and says that it's weird that he's been where Tony's been now that he's hooking up with Juliana, which Juliana says is not the case, saying that she's not a parking spot before sucking his dick. Phil talks to his crew about New Jersey's latest moves on them, with Butch suggesting that they just annihilate Tony, while the Shah of Iran says that he's not going to do that, surprisingly enough. Chris whines to Murmur about a Narcotics Anonymous meeting and tells him about Juliana, revealing that she had a drug problem years back, as Murmur warns Chris that they could enable each other and that Tony's going to murder him if he relapses back into heroin, which Chris insists isn't going to happen. Juliana tells her sponsor about Chris and his connections to the mob, but she tells Juliana that it probably wouldn't be a good idea to keep hooking up with them. And AJ and Blanca watch The 40-Year-Old Virgin before being interrupted by a bunch of sketchy dudes blaring loud music. AJ solves this issue by giving a bike he got for Christmas to the guys as a bribe from them to leave, an offer that the guys accept as the universe rewards AJ for this good deed with a game of Battleship with Blanca. Juliana hacks up a lung from her cold as she insists to Chris not to get any over-the-counter medication, but instead some valerian tea due to its natural sedating effects.
You put 8, 9, 10 tea bags in a cup? It's equal to like taking a Valium.
This line from Juliana piqued my interest, so I decided to test myself if 10 packets of valerian tea can actually knock you out cold. While I got a little bit drowsy and I did feel relaxed, drinking this amount of valerian tea is absolutely nothing like taking a Valium. Chris and Juliana just really want to do drugs. Also, if you want to try this out yourself, let me give you 2 warnings. 1, valerian tea smells like cat piss, and I have to assume that cat piss probably tastes like valerian tea. 2, if you own a cat like I do, shove those used tea bags as far down the garbage as you can. I came home the other day to a bunch of tea packets and tea bags strewn all over the floor, and a few of them were dragged all the way into my bathroom. This is because, as it turns out, valerian tea has the same effect on cats as catnip, which I did not know before buying it. So, if you have a cat and you want to drink a shit ton of valerian tea, don't fuck around. We get a rare fade to black transition to a scene of Tony and AJ setting up the Christmas tree. And Carm finds out that the building inspector is letting her continue construction on the spec house. And she hugs Tony with glee, saying that she's glad that she doesn't have to worry about stupid dead Adriana anymore. Just kidding. The show cuts to Phil in the hospital as he's relieved of any heart issues. And Chris and Juliana start backsliding as they take heroin in Chris's car. Phil has actual heart issues as he stumbles to the doctor for medical assistance. And Murmur delivers this news to Tony as Tony happily buys drinks for everyone, which I gotta say, I don't blame him. Bobby finally gives Junior a visit to the mental facility with his newly healed eye and gives Junior back a Christmas present that he gave to the family, an envelope full of cash, saying that he can't accept it since he tried to murder Tony and stuff. Tony notices Chris talking with Juliana, and Chris claims that she's friends with Kaisha, Chris's fake Gumar that he was telling Tony and Bobby about earlier. Chris and Juliana look absolutely hungover after a long heroin session, which is shown by the fact that Chris can barely even lift his vitamin water, which I think is the real tragedy here. Chris tells Juliana that they should probably tell Tony about their battleship escapades, saying that he's probably going to start connecting the dots soon and that Tony might find out that he's using again, which would fuck things up tremendously for Chris as Juliana begins puking in a pot. Chris actually admits this to Tony later that night as Tony pretends like he doesn't really care and walks away. And he rants to Melfi about how Chris playing Battleship with Juliana is his reward for not cheating on his wife despite the fact that he was trying to cheat on his wife like 5 minutes ago. Melfi reminds Tony that he came out of the shooting with that whole each day is a gift routine and that him not initially wanting to get in bed with Juliana is a corollary to that. Saying that Tony doesn't need to play Battleship with every woman he meets as Tony says that all of the women he's had affairs with all have things in common with each other. Smart, independent, have a dark complexion as Tony puts it, and well off financially. Asking why the hell he keeps wanting to fuck women that are smart, independent, have a dark complexion as Tony puts it, and well off financially. He speculates that his taste in women is the reason he keeps coming to these meetings with Melfi as we cut to this dramatic montage of Chris and Juliana using heroin while a big orchestral score plays in the background. Tony meets with Harris at the pork store, asking about Phil as well as warning him that someone close to Tony might be in danger. Chris and Juliana discuss where they should go from here and if they should go to a meeting, and they agree to do so as Tony walks into Phil's room in the hospital and quietly recounts to Phil his weird coma dream from when he was in the hospital, saying that he never wants to go back there and that Phil probably knows where there is. He tells Phil to focus on the good things when he makes it out of the hospital, like his family and his grandkids, which makes Phil cry a bit as Tony tells him not to. We get our second appearance of the original Christmas Carol film in the show as the Soprano extended family celebrate a Christmas party at the Soprano residence, with Tony asking Chris if he's gonna hog all the ice all aggressively, seemingly still pissed that Chris swiped up Juliana before him. Also, Tony never wear a beret again. Now just stop it upsets me. AJ presents Blanca and Hector to the family, with Tony and Carm talking to each other about how concerning this relationship is to them before Tony goes, well, at least she's Catholic, and Carm leaves. The whole Soprano entourage meets in the living room while Tony talks to Meadow on the phone, and the show zooms out before fading to black, ending season 6. Part 1. If I were to judge this episode compared to all of the other season finales, it would definitely rank down to the bottom. Easily one of the worst endings to a season, or at least part of one. Judging this episode on its own merit, however, I mean, it's alright. I thought Juliana was much better implemented in this episode than she was in her introduction. Her material with Chris in this episode was pretty great. That's really about all I have to say about this episode, however. Pretty forgettable, which is weird considering the fact that the episode opens up with this ginormous explosion. AJ and Blanca getting together makes for some pretty interesting conflict down the road, and the moment where Carmine Jr. rage baits the fuck out of Phil by bringing up Billy's death is really funny. Fun fact, the actress who plays Juliana in this episode is actually named Juliana, isn't that funny? It's pretty sad that even though Carm does seem to show genuine concern for Adriana's well-being, that concern goes away the instant she's distracted by Tony letting her continue work in the spec house. She's like, oh boy, I don't have to feel tremendous guilt anymore about a close family member that may or may not have been murdered by my cousin and can instead distract myself with a frivolous project funded by my husband's blood money. Hooray! Not a whole lot else to say about this episode, unfortunately. To close off season 6A, I am feeling a C tier. An alright end to a pretty good half season. In terms of Soprano season 6A is easily the weakest out of all of them. I know it's kind of unfair to say this, given the fact that a lot of this season mostly serves to build up the conflict that'll take place next season, along with the fact that this isn't technically a separate season, but blah blah blah, who cares. But the quality of a lot of these episodes were noticeably weaker compared to others that we've seen so far. Does that mean that there were only weak episodes this season? Absolutely not. Despite the flaws that this season has, there were no doubt some amazing highlights. Like Tony's whole arc at the beginning of the season with him getting shot and entering the coma dream, Vito's big secret being revealed and the ramifications that result from it, Artie Bucco getting his final moment in the spotlight, and Chris doing heroin. Not really a highlight per se, but hey, it's great for the story. Man, I can't believe this series is almost over already. You'd better tune in for my video covering the last of the Sopranos season 6 because I'm gonna have a couple surprises in store. What do I mean by this? Well, if I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, dumbass. If you don't want to miss said surprises, then make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell like it owes you money. The end is almost here, and there are a few certain special episodes that I am particularly excited to cover. If you've watched this show already, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't watched this show already, what the hell is your problem? Go watch it! Anyways, thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in the final Sopranos tier list, covering Season 6, Part 2. Take care.